Morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. The panel today consists of Mr. Brent McIntyre. My name is Stu McPherson. I'll be chairing the hearing today. A third member may or may not be joining us at a later time. Excuse me. The assessor for today is Ms. Lindsay Warham, and the secretary is Ms. Huda Aziz. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application. We'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of property are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council, and it's independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they so wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You'll receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. Just as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. I would ask anyone with a cell phone to please put that on silent, and we'll have the party sworn.
You have to swear or affirm. Please state your full name.
Lindsay Warham.
And do you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you. Would you like to swear? Please state your full name. And do you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Newman.
Good morning.
You're representing the owner of two properties on the docket today,
That's correct.
and it's the amount of the assessed value only that we're dealing with today?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So the first property we'll deal with is 295 Memorial Boulevard. Ms. Assessor, when you're ready, would you please give us your evidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as stated, we're looking at 295 Memorial Boulevard, file number 19-4090, roll number 12091533500. This is a parking structure. This is a parking structure located on the corner of Memorial Boulevard and St. Mary Avenue, also known as the Bay Parkade. This parking structure has two ages built because there was a section on top of the parking structure that was built in 1964 for the vehicle service garage, and the structure itself was built in 1954 based on our records. We have a land area of 63,485 square feet. We're assessing for 750 indoor unheated parking stalls. There are more parking stalls, but because of remediations that have been happening with the structure and sections of the structure that have been closed, we're only assessing for the stalls that are being used, which is 750. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $12,067,000. On page 2 of my brief, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property as previously described, and in the bottom right-hand photo, you'll see the aerial photo that shows the vehicle service garage as well. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. On page 4, you'll see requests for income and expense information. And on page 5, I've just included a chart of land sales to show what we would be assessing for the bare land for the parking structure. I've shown 5 sales with sales that range from $66.16 to $96.98. And then the time adjusted sales range from $95.45 upwards of $117.42. These are all land sales that are in close proximity to the subject property. The subject property is shown in the far right side of the column, and the bare land, based on our modeling, would be assessed at $6,067,000 at $95.57 a square foot. On page 6 of my brief, you'll see the income valuation summary for the vehicle service garage. We have 2,820 square feet at a rent of $13.83. We've applied our model parameters for 2020 cycle. I'd like to note that our model parameters are based on a fresh look that we take for the 2020 reassessment. We analyze data every cycle for a reassessment. New information comes in as of the reference date, and we analyze it based on the legislation that we have to look at the information that we have for the reference date and come up with new model parameters every cycle. So again, we have a vacancy of 4%, expenses of 2%, a cap rate of 7.3% for a total value of $496,000. I'd like to note that the applicant will be accepting that value for the vehicle service garage. On page 7, you'll see a range of comparables for the vehicle service garage that we present for the board for the 2020 cycle, with an average of $14 and a median of $12.63. On page 8, you'll see the income stream for the parking structure. We have 750 stalls at a monthly net unit rent of $90 a stall. I'd like to note that parking, the way it's assessed, models the parameters based on net rents per stall. So we take those values from the net operating income lines. We don't come up with a gross and then apply an expense ratio. We model the per stall rate on a net basis from those mailers. So the monthly net unit rent that has been applied is $90. We consider this parking structure a sort of below average quality parking structure because of all of the things that are going on with it. There's been a lot of remediations, it's relatively old, so we've already tried to acknowledge that when we apply our model parameters to it. Just to note, we assess parking, surface parking lots in the area at $103.50, and our model for unheated parking structures and parking lots are the same. We apply the same rates to both because the information that we get sort of shows that surface parking lots do charge the same rates and garner the same rents as typically unheated parking structures. So just to note that our surface parking lots in the area are at $103.50. So we've already tried to acknowledge in the net operating income from the model that's applied with our $90 rate. On the bottom of page 8, you'll also see a range of parking structures. There's not a lot of standalone parking structures that we have in the city of Winnipeg, so what we've tried to do is to present all of them here for you today, because our model for parking structures is based on things citywide, and we try to look at the downtown based on downtown. So the first two parking structures you'll see, one is 147 Provencher Boulevard, and that is a heated parking structure. It's a surface level parking structure outside of the downtown in a condo building. So there's only 30 stalls there, and it's a main level parking structure. So it's not really comparable to the subject, as well as 374 Taché. That's the parking structure which is also unheated at the St. Boniface Hospital, which is also located outside of the downtown. The remaining parking structures on the chart here, comparables 2 through 15, are located in the downtown. The first one is 295 Memorial Boulevard, which is the subject parking structure, and they're making a rate of $97.27. I would like to note, if you turn to the income and expense mailer that I've submitted in the brief on page 13, you'll see that they're reporting a loss in income. So if you look at the maintenance and repair line, they have a maintenance and repair line of $1,811,591. If you look at page 15 of the mailer that was submitted, they show a list of expenses listed to Crozier, Kilgore, and Vector Construction. I made a call when I saw this to the owner to confirm that that's $1.7 million was included in this maintenance and repair line, and I got confirmation that it was. So these are capital costs that have been used, so we have removed those capital costs from the maintenance and repair line to come up with that $97.27, because that is what they are making. They're just reinvesting that money into capital costs. So I just wanted to note, in case that was noticed, that there is a negative net operating income, that is why. A number of these parking structures that you'll see, the ones that are in closer proximity to the subject property, excuse me, I just have to take a sip of water. The one that's in closest proximity to the subject property is number 15 at 266 Hargrave Street. And they're also an unheated parking structure that's on the older side. It was built in 1956, and they're making $121.67 a stall. I believe of all my comparables, that is the most comparable property because it is unheated and it's in very, very close proximity to the subject. A number of other ones on the higher range would be our 35 Albert, that's the 201 Portage parking structure. 299 Fort is a totally heated parking structure that's also on the higher end of our range. So it would be less comparable, and those would be sort of our excellent quality parking structures that charge the highest rates in the city, and those are the most sought after as they're connected to skywalks and things like that. 223 James and 180 King Street are heated parking structures. They're below buildings and they're in the Exchange. They're sort of more on the outskirts of the downtown. 329 Hargrave is also in very close proximity to the subject property. It's a brand new parking structure. It's a Centerpoint development that was built on the parcel where the Alt Hotel is near the MTS Center. They are making a very low rate, and it's because they're giving a lot of subsidized rates to the tenants of the building. So they're offering a lot of free monthly parking to people or subsidized parking at a below market rate. So that's why that $98 is a little on the low side. If they were charging market, it would be significantly higher. The next thing I want to point out is the cap rate on our income stream of 7%. We were at, I believe, 7.5% last cycle, and we have moved down to 7%. We've been noticing compressing cap rates in all sorts of property types. Their parking structures very, very rarely sell, and if they do sell, we don't often get information for them. The most recent parking structure sale was a share sale of 295 Gary Street, which we don't have any information on with respect to the sale or the income of the property at the time of the share sale. In addition, 295 Gary Street also sold previous to that, but it sold with the building attached to it as well, so we couldn't break out anything because it was all subdivided and there were air rates involved. So that was another sale that we couldn't get any information on. So the most recent sale before that was 299 Fort, which is the city Winnipeg Square parking structure, and it sold in 2010 with a reported 8% cap rate. And at the time of sale, that parking structure was in a state of disrepair and needed a lot of remediation, and there was a large engineering report that was involved with the sale, and it still sold with a reported 8% in 2010. So we now have a reference date of 2018, so we're looking at compressing cap rates from 2010, so we feel confident with our 7%. In addition, if you look on my brief on page 21, we've just shown a number of cap rates for different subject property types: office properties, retail properties, multifamily, industrial properties, and they're showing very, very low cap rates in them. For the office properties, we're ranging from 5.8% to up to 6.54%. Retail, we're ranging from 3.1 upwards of 7.4. Multifamily, we're ranging from about 4% upwards of 5%. And industrial properties, we're ranging from about 4.97 to 8%. We understand that parking structures do have a lot of issues with them with respects to cars coming in and out, salt, remediation, older structures, having to do a lot of work with repairing cement and levels, just with a lot of wear and tear that it gets from the outside elements and cars coming in and out. So we believe that the 7% is a good estimate of what a parking structure would sell for based on all the other information we have to look at. On page 9, you'll also see another chart. These are gross parking rates that are taken from parking websites from parking management companies such as Impark, Indigo, Forks North Portage, just to get an idea of what sort of rates they're charging for hourly parking, daily parking, evening, monthly parking. Just because, like I said, we don't get a lot of responses on our parking structures and we don't have a lot of them. So what we do to try to show that we are doing our due diligence, when you have little information, you do have to take secondary sources of information to see if you're hitting the mark with respect to your modeled parameters for mass appraisal. So we've looked at also gross rates, and we model an expense ratio from the income and expense mailers. So we model the expense ratio to find out what a typical expense ratio is for parking lots and parking structures. And a typical expense ratio is about 45%. So what we do is we look at that 45% expense ratio and we apply it to those gross rates that are being reported that they're charging, to also see if those net values that we're coming up with in our model from the mailers are on par, and we are usually seeing that they are on par with what's happening in the market. On page 10, you'll see the income valuation summary. We have an income stream for vehicle service garage and an income stream for the parking structure. One is at $496,000 and one is at $11,571,000 for an estimated total market value of $12,067,000. On page 11, you'll see our cap rate information. We include this in all of our briefs. This is general cap rate information. We have taken property types that are researched by companies such as Colliers, CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, and they analyze cap rates on these property types. So we've represented our information for the same property types. And again, there are no parking structures on this. We just show this to sort of show how our model is hitting the mark with what other companies are seeing for cap rates versus what we're applying in our model. On page 12, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. On page 13, you'll see the mailer that I went through previously. Again, they're showing a negative net operating income, but if you remove the capital costs from the repair and maintenance line, they are making $97.27. They are charging $4 for an hour for the first half hour and $1.75 for each additional hour, a daily rate of $11, and two monthly rates of $170 for random monthly parking and $190 for reserved monthly parking. And again, if you look at that $170 and you apply a typical 45% expense ratio to it, you're coming up with $93.50. And if you look at the $190 rate and you apply that 45% expense ratio, you're coming in around $104.50. They've reported that they have a 43% expense ratio. Again, removing that capital cost, that's coming in on the mark of what typical expense ratio is for parking structures. If you look at page 15, they do have $1.7 million of capital costs that they're reporting. As stated previously, there are a number of sections of this parking structure that are boarded up and that are closed because there are a lot of things that they're doing. What the owner has chosen to do is they're taking the money that they're making in this parking structure and they're putting it into the things that need to be done to repair it. It is an old parking structure, we do acknowledge that, and they're reinvesting their money into the structure to make sure that they can keep it up to date, that they can keep their investment, and then they're making sure that it's safe for people who are parking there. On page 16, you'll see the in-park details as of the reference date of April 1st, 2018. We have 4 different rates that in-park says that they are charging: $170, $190, and $210. On page 17, again, these are the monthly details, showing that the number of spaces is 750 stalls, that there are plugs here, and that they have hourly and daily and evening and weekend rates. On page 18 through 23, this is our agenda that the City of Winnipeg is putting in all of our briefs. Again, I went through the fresh look that we're taking. I spoke about the cap rate evidence, and I didn't go through the non-recoverable expense sampling because Mr. Newman is accepting our net operating income on the vehicle service garage, which includes the 2% and not the 5%. So pending any questions, I'm finished my presentation pending questions.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, questions for the assessor?
Willing buyer, willing seller at April 1, 2018, that's the test, correct?
Correct.
Physical condition of the property as it is today, correct?
Correct.
So, you point us to, at page 13 of your brief, the questionnaire.
Okay.
You point us to the fact that the net operating income is a negative $843,000.
Correct.
And you indicated that you reached out to the owner and you made inquiries.
Yes.
Who did you speak to?
I reached out to the owner, and the person who contacted me was the agent for the owner, which is yourself, Mr. Newman, and you responded in an email indicating that that was the case.
All right. So let's note, however, though, that the total income on that questionnaire includes the income for the vehicle service garage.
It does, and the $97 that I included, that I spoke to, I took the parking income of $1,525,000, and I removed all expenses net of that capital cost expenditure. I did not include the rental income when coming up with that.
So, you talked about the fact that there are capital expenditures being made, and you have removed those from the calculation of the stabilized net operating income.
Correct.
And I gather you do that on all parking structures.
We typically try to do that. That's why we have a section of the mailer on the second page, past the income and expense page, where we ask people to detail what capital costs are being.
And do you get a lot of information from others about capital costs?
We do get some, but not often, and if there is a high repair and maintenance expense, such as in this case, I do reach out and contact people to find out what is going in with those repair and maintenance. We don't typically find very, very high repair and maintenance expenses, but what I also do as a secondary check is I look at any permits that have been taken out for the property to see what the permit is for, what the declared value is. So if they're not reporting it, I am still looking at the permits that are taken out for all of the parking structures to get an idea of what they're doing.
So let's just talk about parking structures in a general sense for just a moment.
Okay.
We have a parking structure across the street, the Civic Parkade, which is closed. It's closed because it was structurally unsafe, because it wasn't properly looked after. Okay. The issue with parking lots, I take it you would agree, is that the combination of sand, salt, moisture gets into the concrete. It causes the reinforcing steel to start to rust. Rust is an expansive process, and as the steel rusts and expands, it delaminates the concrete. In other words, the concrete starts to fall apart. And the way they deal with that is they send engineers in and they drop chains through the parking surface, and they mark every single spot where that's happened, and then they have to come back in, jackhammer it out, put new steel in, and then protect it.
Correct.
That's the problem with parking structures in a general sense.
In a general sense,
Right.
and I would agree with you.
And if you don't look after them, the end result will be what's happening across the street at the Civic Parkade. Okay. And people are a lot smarter about that today than they were 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. The other thing they do once they've repaired the concrete is they have to waterproof the surfaces. And the way they do that is to put down a waterproof membrane. Agreed?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. That waterproof membrane, however, wears out, so it has to be reapplied every so many years.
Based on the information I have read, yes.
All that process that I've just described to you, would you consider all of that capital expenditures and therefore would be ignored in the process of looking at the expenses of these parking structures?
In the sense of capital expenditures, you have to look at it on the grand scheme of things. On normal wear and tear that you're maintaining your lot on a regular repair and maintenance schedule, those would be typical repair and maintenance costs. But if you've deferred maintenance and deferred maintenance and deferred maintenance and deferred maintenance and haven't been keeping up with your repair and maintenance, those end up turning into capital costs because you're not maintaining that repair and maintenance schedule. So that's where you have to look at it. And when you look at the history of this parking structure, they had very, very low repair and maintenance, low, and now they're in a situation where they're having to spend a lot of money at once. Where where a typical parking structure owner, if they're getting into it, would know that they have to do a certain amount of things every year and would be doing that ongoing. And I think that in this case, the owner has realized what they need to do, and they will be keeping up with the regular repair and maintenance schedule.
And of course, the purchaser who's buying the property as of April 1 of 2018 is going to take into account that physical condition and the state of repair or disrepair, and that's going to impact the decision to purchase and the price at which the purchase will be made. Agreed?
Correct.
Okay. So, but let me just ask you one other thing. The concept of having to reapply a waterproofing membrane every 5 years, every 7 years, would you consider that a capital expenditure or regular repair and maintenance?
It would probably be regular repair and maintenance that they need to do.
Okay,
And again, you have to look at the age of the parking structure also, because I would say that construction materials from a parking structure in 1954 are vastly different than a parking structure that's built today. I know that they probably do things differently and they put things together when they build it, thinking about the things that have happened. And I'm sure people aren't building houses the exact same way they were in 1954. We've got newer construction materials and we've got more educated engineers working on these things.
but I think the point about the waterproofing membrane is that it's the wear and tear of the vehicles that causes it to need to be replaced. So it's properly put in, but you're still gonna need to replace it on a regular basis.
Correct, and I don't think that they would be replacing it in its entirety. They would be doing sections of the parking structure on a certain regular repair and
And
maintenance
so my
schedule.
point is simply, at the end of the day, because you're not getting very much information you're telling us earlier from parking structure owners, I'm gonna suggest to you that your expense ratios aren't adequately taking into account the cost of this type of remedial work. Some of which, from your perspective, will be capital expenditure, some of which will be regular repair and maintenance, but it's caused by the unique structure and nature of parking structures I'm suggesting. Would you agree?
I'm not sure I agree with that, no.
So, you made mention of the fact that parking stalls are closed, and that's why you're using 750 stalls. So I want to make a distinction, if I can, between, there's a section of that parking structure that is fully boarded off and has been for a number of years, because it is on the roof of what is the loading dock area for the Bay Store. You're familiar with that? But quite apart from that, as the remedial work is being done, sections of the lot have to be closed off. So you've got an area that's permanently closed off because it's structurally unsound over the loading dock, but you've got separate areas that as they do the work, they'll be closed on a rotating basis. Your calculations don't take into account the rotation of the closure of those areas for that work, do they?
We work directly from the number of stalls that are in the parking structure based on what's being reported. And there are a number of parking structures that do repairs on a rotating basis.
Yeah.
266 Hargrave went through a number of ones that I pointed to, 299 Fort. They also are repairing stalls on a rotating basis where a number of stalls are closed, but we still work on a net operating income per the total number of stalls.
I understand.
We can't be working with a fluctuated stall count, so they're still making,
Well, you say you can't be working, you could, but you're not, is the bottom line.
to track when stalls are
Sure.
closed from year to year. That's why we work from the net operating income, and the net operating income is on the total number of stalls. For example, 266 Hargrave, if a number of those stalls are closed, well, it's while they're working on remediation and they have 551 stalls in total. If we were to remove stalls because they're closed, that net operating income isn't gonna be $121.61, it's gonna be a lot higher because it's based on less stalls. So they're still making that money.
Page 5 of your brief, your land sale comparables.
Yes,
In order to get to vacant land, of course, you have to demolish the structure.
correct.
Do you have an estimate of the cost of demolishing that parking structure?
I don't have an estimate of cost of
If I
demolition.
suggested to you the cost of demolishing the structure across the street is $9.7 million, would that be news to you?
I haven't looked into the demolition costs of the Civic Parkade, no.
Page 11 is the chart of capitalization rates. And as you noted, there's no parking structures on there. And again, as you noted, there's no transactional evidence to work with, correct?
Not a lot.
Well, so 2010, the Winnipeg Square Parkade, that's the only one you can point to, correct?
That's the most recent one, and when you have no information, you do have to look at the information you can't have. You can't totally disregard it, otherwise how would you ever develop a cap rate on something?
So, but just by way of comparison, if we look at the office section, for example, it's the city's view that the downtown office buildings, the B-class buildings, have a capitalization rate of 6.75%, correct?
Okay,
And this will be a large number of large office buildings in the downtown area. So it's your view that those buildings, with stable tenants, connected to walkways, many of them, some of them with some underground parking, those buildings should sell at a 6.75 cap rate, but these parking structures with all the unique factors that we've been talking about, their cap rate should only be 25 basis points higher. That's your view.
yeah, we believe that that's appropriate.
Right. And the way you've gotten to that is in part by the concept that there's been a compression of capitalization rates generally is the view of the city. So too, for parking structures, the cap rate should compress from 7.5 to 7. Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you. How long has these repairs been going on?
They've really stepped it into high gears in the past few years, because I believe we'll see in Mr. Newman's evidence that, they had a engineering report done, I think it's 2015. And so they, I think, yeah, November 5th, 2015, they got a wake-up call as to what needed to be done and found out that a lot needed to be done, so they've really stepped it into high gear. Based on the information that we have in our system, I went back to the permits to 2009. Nothing really had been taken out. We had $24,000 worth of work, and this is all structural work. I didn't include any permits that were for other things. Then we had the occupancy for the vehicle service garage, so that's not really included. Then in 2013, there was about $270,000. And then in 2016, our permits have gone through the roof on this because the engineering report outlines all the stuff that needs to be done. And since 2016, they have stepped it into high gear, I think in 2016, because they had a lot of, again, Mr. Newman's gonna get into this in his presentation. According to the engineering report, based on me reading it and discussing this property with Mr. Newman, they had a lot of life safety issues, things that needed to be handled right away. So they put about $3 million in, then in 2017 they didn't do a lot, and then again in 2018 we have another $2 million worth of permits that were taken out. So it's about $5 million. So once Mr. Newman goes through his presentation, they're on schedule with the repair and maintenance that's been outlined in the engineering report.
Okay, thank you.
Shirley, question? I noticed that it's a 1954 original, buried this 1964. Is that as a result of ongoing work, or is that, do you know why the variance was there?
The 1954 to 1964 is because we have two, in our system, we classified as two separate buildings. One was the parking structure that was built in 1954, that's its age and effective age. And the vehicle service garage was added in 1964, and that's its age and effective age.
Okay, thank you. And the 750 stalls that are being assessed, how many stalls are there in total?
830, and we changed it from 800, it was 830 in 2012, and I think prior to that. And in 2014, we lowered it to 809, and handled it via a 15-1 agreement, and lowered the stall counts to that. And I believe we've been at 750, I think since 2016.
In 2016, that's when they started significant amount of rotating work, closing things.
I
down.
believe so. Again, Mr. Newman can get into more detail on that in his presentation.
But to your knowledge, has it been about 80 stalls, 50 to 80 stalls at a time? Being worked on?
I'm not sure how many they close at a time and on a rotating basis. Again, it's hard to keep track of that when they're moving through a different number of stalls at a different time of year and how many are be able to be occupied. We've been always using 750. There really hasn't been a discussion or argument with that. Impark has listed on their website for the same number of years that there's 750 spaces here. It did somehow get increased by an error, but it got corrected very, very quickly. So they've also been advertising that there are 750 stalls available on this lot. So we're pretty confident that 750 is appropriate.
Okay. And when you netted these properties out to, I think you said 45% is typical
Yes.
operating expenses, how many properties did you look at to derive that number?
All of the properties that are listed on page 5, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there may have been about 2 or 3 more that are not listed on this sheet.
Sorry, page 5, that's the last.
Or page 8, sorry, my mistake,
Page eight?
sorry.
Okay. So 15 plus properties.
Yeah, we only, standalone parking structures, where you only have information for parking structures, I think we have about 22 in our inventory. So when we have about 17 mailers that get returned to us, and then, about 5 that don't, we have to work with what we have, and that's the information that we have for us, and if those are the only ones in our inventory, we have to model based on those ones, which is why we create a model citywide,
Okay.
even
And-
though most of them are downtown parking structures.
And you referenced the building permits, you said there were a significant amount, you didn't include them. Page 15, you've given us quite a few costs here that you say are capital costs.
This
You
is,
didn't- You
sorry,
didn't include the permits because you
On
figured they're
pa-
covered by this?
on page 15, this is just what's reported by the owner. I included this because this was part of the income and expense mailer for the property. They actually don't say what each of those costs are for, it just says who, the supplier is. So they haven't actually outlined what was being done on it. I didn't put the permits in my brief, I'm not sure, why I omitted it. I look at them with respect to when I'm researching properties to find out what's been done, what it's for. I read the permit and find out what they're doing, and then look at the costs involved.
Okay. I know Crozier Kilgore is a consulting firm, so are these all just for reports?
I'm not really sure, that would have to be a question for Mr. Newman, because it is something that came from the owner.
Okay, I will ask Mr. Newman when we get to that. And finally, I guess not finally, it is, first of all, on page 21, you provided us with a sampling of cap rates. And can you explain how those were done?
These cap rates, to my knowledge, these are cap rates that have been involved in every brief. They were vetted by our staff. They have been included because the staff who looked at them, they have bona fide, their arm's length transactions, they've contacted, they did stabilized, they did a 3-year stabilized to come up with the for net operating income to figure out the cap rate. So these were vetted by our staff and looked at and reviewed, and that's the information that we have. But we know that they're bona fide arm's length transactions.
And they're based on actual
Based on
INEs that were
actual
reported.
INEs. These are sales that we would have had more than 1 year of information on, that we would have been able to come up with a good 3-year stabilized net operating income to apply against the sale price to derive a cap rate.
Okay, and did anyone go through the exercise of comparing what this yield versus what the model?
We have just added this, to my knowledge, as supplementary information to come towards the panels to say, in addition to the cap rate evidence that we've provided in our brief, this is now supplemental to say, here are actual sales of properties that are bona fide, arm's length, market transactions that have been reviewed thoroughly.
Okay, and the compression of the cap rate, does this fall into that at all?
In what sense?
And to verify that cap rates have been, or is it strictly on the reports that other?
We analyze our
companies
cap
have done?
rates from year to year, so when we review sales for properties for each reassessment cycle, we would have reviewed sales for the reassessment cycle for 2018, we would have reviewed sales for the reassessment cycle for 2016, and we would have noted what was happening from year to year when looking at what's happening in the modeling as well, for when they come up with their cap rates that they model as well. So we would have noted the changes, and that's
Okay.
how we can say that.
And I think it was mentioned that the compression for parking structures was from 7.5 to 7?
I would have to double check my brief, but I'm pretty sure that it was. Just give me one moment and I can tell you definitively. Yes, 7.5 to 7.
Okay, and then what was mentioned in questioning was the Class B office buildings downtown.
Mhm.
Did they show a half-point compression as well? Is that something that determined a half point for parking structures as well?
I did not review any sales for cap rates for the 2018 reassessment, especially with respect to other property types, so I was not involved in analyzing sale information for our buildings for the 2018 cycle, so I wouldn't be able to definitively say what was involved in going from one to the next, because I'm not quite sure what we had for Office B towers in 2018.
But you did mention that the cap rates were compressing from
Yes,
that cycle to the other.
we have noticed that in a number of property types. I can't speak specifically to what the cap rates were for one specific property type to the next.
Okay, I thank you. Mr. Newman, we'll hear from you, please.
So, what I think I will do is maybe just turn the pages of my attachments first. But let me say to you, Mr. McPherson, your question about Crozier Kilgore. So Crozier Kilgore are an engineering firm, and you're gonna see in a moment the report they did back in 2015, which was the beginning of this process of remediation. The reason they send periodic invoices is because, of course, they're inspecting the work as it's being done. So that's why you're seeing the frequency and the number of invoices from them. So let's start with my attachments, not the text in my brief, but my attachments, which were hand numbered in the lower right-hand corner. Page 1, of course, was the calculation of the value that we're dealing with here today.
Can you give us one moment, please, Mr.
Yeah.
Newman? We're all there?
So just going back a little bit, and as you'll likely know, Ms. Wareham and I have been doing these parking structures and surface parking lots for a number of years now. And this has been an ongoing issue. I put on the cover of my brief that picture, but of course, that's not the Bay Parkade, that's the Civic Parkade across the street. But it always struck me that, leaving aside, I think, what's been called Stalinist architecture, it always struck me that that's a good example of what the issues are with parking structures. They are a very unique type of property in terms of the risks, and with great respect to the city and the assessor opposite me, I don't think those risks are properly appreciated or understood, and I don't think the expense ratio calculation properly takes into account what goes on with parking structures. As the assessor has said, they remove capital expenditures from those ratio calculations, but there's a big difference between having to jackhammer out concrete and replace it, which, if you're lucky, is a one-time occurrence, and the need to every 5 years or 6 years or 7 years redo the membrane in the drive aisles and ramps in a parking structure, where you get much greater wear and tear, of course, than you do in the actual parking stalls. And I just don't think these ratios are properly taking this into account, because the reality of parking structures today is you have to have a regular program of maintenance, and if you don't, then your structure is gonna fall apart one day. And when we come to the next one, the Union Center parking structure, I can tell you, they have Crozier Kilgore in there every single year looking at things, and it turns into a money cost. So we, for the 2018 cycle, that was when we brought forward this engineering report for the first time. And very much the same argument that I'm making here today was made on that go-round. And the argument was that at April 1 of 2016, here's an engineering report that says they need to spend $10 million, and how is a purchaser going to take that into account? And what we ended up doing was an amortization of that cost, and that was accepted to some extent by the panel who heard this matter, and that is what page 2 and page 3 are. And what they did on page 2 and page 3 is they made, if you see at the top of page 3, they made an adjustment to the net operating income to take into account repairs that had been done at that point in time. Because remember that when we are sitting doing this hearing back in October of 17, we're taking into account the physical condition of the property at that date. And by that point, of course, they had started to do some work already, and so the panel was most interested in knowing how much of the work has been done and how much remains to be done. And so ultimately, value that was proposed at $11,315,000 was reduced to $7,811,000, including, of course, the vehicle service garage. But I tell you that only so you'll understand it's the same conceptual argument that's being made here on this go-round. Then we come, starting at page 4, to the Crozier-Kilgore report, which carries on through page 33, all in the lower right-hand corner. I don't think the assessor is quarreling with me in terms of what I'm saying about the condition of this parking structure or the remedial steps that have needed to be taken or what causes it. And I'll say to you simply, as I asked of her in the questions, moisture is the killer. And moisture gets into the concrete and it seeps in, it gets at the reinforcing steel. That creates a rusting process, it's a chemical reaction, rusting, and the steel expands, it gets bigger because of the rusting, and as it gets bigger, the technical word is it delaminates the concrete, but essentially it pushes it apart. And what the engineers do, and I've actually watched them do this, I've seen them do this in the Winnipeg Square Parkade, where I park, they take a chain, a length of chain, and they walk around, they drop the chain on the concrete, and they listen for the sound. If it's a hollow sound, they know the concrete is delaminated. Out comes that bright fluorescent spray paint can, and it gets marked and circled, and then eventually they come back and jackhammer it out and redo the steel, and that goes on for months, and eventually they put a waterproof membrane down. That's what they do these days. It's incredibly expensive to do. But that's what you have to do. So that's what this report details in significant detail. If you look at page 6 in the lower right-hand corner, you can see I've got it circled. There was a budgeted expenditure of $10,147,000 when this report was done in 2015, no GST and no engineering fees. And they proceeded to do the work, and it's ongoing. The assessor notes that that part of the building or part of the structure is 1954, the other part is 1964. It wasn't just the vehicle service garage that was added in 64. They actually added an additional floor of parking at that point, and the service garage was put up there. This is what's going on in this lot. And if you look, for example, at page 15 in the lower right-hand corner, section 3.2, you've got the heading sounding survey. That's what they do. They can take a hammer to it, or they can do the chain drag sounding survey. That's how they do it. So this is what they've had to do in this parking structure. And there's lots of technical information in here, but again, as I say, I don't think the dispute is about the condition or the work that needs to be done or the science that's behind it and the nature of the remedial work that needs to be done. And as I say, the picture on the cover, that's the poster child for what happens if you don't do the work. And they are a lot smarter today than they were. And you know, the same thing happens in apartment buildings with balconies. It's exactly the same problem. They've got reinforcing steel in them, they weren't moisture protected, water gets in, steel rusts, people have to fix balconies on apartment buildings all the time for exactly the same reason. So, having said all of that, let me jump ahead to page 34. Page 34 is a news report about the closure of the Civic Parkade and why it had to be done, the 60-year-old parkade. Page, my numbering is different, but the next page is page 41. This is the reporting by artists that we've heard about. If you go to page 42, you can see it boxed and arrowed about the capitalization rate of 8%. Page 43 is the history for 7 years of the revenues and expenses associated with this parking structure. And you can see, and as the 2017 column is what's noted in the questionnaire, there's a loss of $843,000. But this is what's going on in this parking structure. If you look at 2015, where the NOI was $829,000, you can see that repair and maintenance was very low in that year compared to a number of the prior years, where numbers were in the 249, 223 range. That's the history. Page 44, and I think ultimately this is the key to this whole thing we're dealing with here today. So this is their budget plan for the additional repair work that needs to be done. So 2019, $1,460,000 was to be spent. And then $1,350,000 to complete the waterproofing on levels 3 and 4, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the cost of doing this stuff. And then year 2, following that, is $358,000 to finish the P3 closed area. I'm gonna show you some pictures of that in a moment, but that's the area. So it's on the 3rd level, and it's boarded off, because it is structurally unsound for the loading dock that is underneath it. Year 3, $739,000 to finish the 4th level, and then years 4 to 6, they're gonna spend $125,000 a year. Page 45 is, this is an update issued by the city about the Civic Center Parkade. I put it here only so it needs to be understood. If you look at the update, May 6, 2019, the bottom update, the 3rd bullet down, Class 1 cost estimate, $9.7 million for the demolition of the Civic Parkade. And then if you go one further page beyond, you'll come to the pictures of the boarded up area on the 3rd level of this parkade. That's my fine photography, just so we're clear. That's why it's happening. And then the last page is a calculation of value. I'll circle back to that in a moment, because I want you to understand how we've gotten there. So, having explained all of that to you, let's now come back to the beginning of my brief, the text. And in many ways, I've walked through everything on page 1. I've walked through everything on page 2. So at the top of page 3, so here's where I talk about the projected expenditures summary, which I walked you through a moment ago, which is page 44 of the attachments. So I explain here at the top of page 3 of the text that they've got to spend another $2,933,000. But I want to be crystal clear on something. There are different types of repairs they do, and they each have a different lifespan. When you do the concrete, your hope is that's a forever repair. When you're doing waterproofing membrane, which is a lot of what remains to be done, that's not a forever repair. And the reason that's important is because I've taken a different amortization period with that. And essentially, when we did this 2 years ago, we took the $10,147,000, we adjusted a little bit for the work that was done, but the amortization period on that was much longer, because a lot of it was concrete, with a longer lifespan once it's done. What we're talking about remaining to be done substantially here is not concrete, but it's waterproofing and it's finishing work of that type. And so I've taken a 10-year amortization. And essentially what I'm saying is, if I'm the buyer coming to buy this property at April 1 of 18, but taking into account the physical condition today, I've got to spend $2,933,000. And I'm going to adjust that in some way. Now, I can take that off as a lump sum perhaps, or I can amortize that, which I think is the more appropriate way. And so what I did is I took an amortization, and if you now go back to the very last page of the brief, where the calculation is, you can see there that what I've done is I've taken the assessor's $810,000. And yes, I hear what the assessor says. We know stuff gets closed temporarily. We know it's gonna impact income, but we can't track that. It's difficult for us to track that. So we're gonna use the 750 stalls. Okay, I hear that. I've started with the assessor's net operating income of $810,000. But then what I've done is I've subtracted from that the amortized repair and maintenance of $293,000, which I've explained to you how we get to that. And then I've applied an 8% capitalization rate. Why? Because I just believe that this compression of cap rates we're hearing about, first of all, I don't believe it's happened generally. More importantly, I don't believe there's any evidence to base it on in respect to parking structures. Parking structures bring with them a very unique set of risks. And if I'm the guy buying this thing, I don't know for sure how things are gonna turn out in terms of all these repairs. And so I want a margin, I want an additional risk element to be factored in, and that's why I've used a capitalization rate of 8%. And so that results in a value of $6,458,000 for the parking structure. You combine that with the $495,000 for the vehicle service garage, and you've got $6,953,000 overall, and that's my request of you in terms of value. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, questions for the applicant?
I do. Mr. Newman, you talked about our expense ratio at 45%, not taking into account the repair and maintenance and capital costs, and that it's not accurate in your mind. Have you done an expense ratio study for parking structures?
I don't have the luxury of having all the data you have, so it's not possible for me to do it.
Okay, so you don't actually know what's gone into our expense ratio study and what's been involved, you just
Other than
feel
what
that
you-
the 45% isn't accurate?
Other than what you've explained to me, which is that you've removed anything you consider to be a capital expenditure, and you don't get a lot of information from parking structure owners in terms of how they're spending that money.
So you would agree that you're not aware of how we've come up with the net operating incomes, who's reported what for capital costs, whether or not they're even reported? You have no information and you haven't done an expense ratio study.
There's 4 questions there. So I'm gonna try and answer them. What I know about how you've done your study is what you've explained to me about how it's been done.
Okay.
I don't know the detail of the reporting you get from other owners, because I don't have access to that. That's probably enough.
You spoke about apartment buildings and having to redo balconies and things like that. So if a prospective purchaser was looking to purchase a multifamily property and they had balconies and they know that they have to remediate a bunch of things, what do you think an appropriate cap rate for multifamily properties would be? Because the evidence that I've shown in my brief, we're in and around the 4 and 5% range for multifamily properties.
You're not actually in the 4% range. I know you guys trot out these things that you put in your brief at page 21, but the prior page indicates that these are not meant to be comparables for any specific property. And more importantly, if you look at the chart on page 11 of your brief, you can see that for multifamily, the city's view is that the range is 4.9 to 5.3, and not at the 20th and 80th percentiles, and not those 4s that you speak about. I will also say to you that in respect of those multifamily, that a number of those were purchased for purposes of a rehab, and I know that Altus has filed material in which they indicate that there's a municipal board decision that says you have to approach with caution capitalization rates extracted from properties that are purchased for rehab.
Okay. My next question for you, I'm looking at the information that you put in your brief, and I just have to find the page that it's on. So on page 44, the revised 6-year schedule, so in years 4 through 6, it says $125,000 annually. And you spoke previously in your presentation about sort of like, the waterproofing that needs to be done. Is that $125,000 annually would be like the regular maintenance schedule for the waterproofing membrane?
No, and to be honest, I don't know exactly what that is, but I think that what's contemplated is that the waterproofing is actually picked up in that $1,350,000. I think that's where the waterproofing is, or the majority of the waterproofing is contemplated.
Yes, you did say that, and that's for the waterproofing of all of the work that's been done. But you did say, and I could be mistaken in your presentation, that they have to like regularly keep up with the waterproofing on a yearly basis. So I'm saying, if that's the only fee that's left, what would be that $125,000?
So, and let me respond to that. What I said in a general sense is that once you do this waterproofing, it's not one time. There will be, I'll use the phrase, spot repairs required on an ongoing basis thereafter, because this waterproofing membrane eventually wears out. It wears out quicker in the drive aisles and ramps because there's greater wear and tear there. It wears out more slowly in the parking stalls because there's not as much wear and tear there because traffic is not coming and going. So that's what I was talking about when I spoke of the ongoing cost of dealing with membrane issues.
Okay. And then, looking at your workup, I think it's the last page of your addenda. So, in the workup with respect to the parking structure, you've adjusted the gross income, or net income, essentially. It's been called effective gross income, but essentially you've adjusted the net income and netted it again of the repair and maintenance, and then applied another higher capitalization rate. Would you consider that double counting for the same issue? You're talking about more risk involved, more repair and maintenance, which you're talking about with respect to higher cap rates, and then you're also applying it to the net operating income. Is that not double counting?
No, and the reason it's not double counting is because the $293,000, which is an amortized cost, of course, it recognizes what is known today. What I'm saying is that these structures bring with them a unique set of risks, different than any other type of property. There is going to be the future unknown, and that's what the increase in capitalization rate is intended to address.
Okay. I think those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre.
Just one question. So you're looking for 6.9 million,
That's correct.
and in 2018, it was at 7.8 million.
It's under appeal.
It is at the municipal boards. That was my only question.
Thank you. So, just to be clear, this 293,314, the amortized amount, that's to remediate as it is now.
That's right. That's to finish what is known as of today physical condition.
Okay, and then, so therefore you're kind of accepting that a 45% expense ratio would be normal in a normal condition, is that correct?
I'm accepting it, I'll use the phrase for purposes of this hearing without prejudice, but yes, it's my starting point.
Okay. And the 8% cap rate,
Yeah.
I know it's gonna sound foolish because you said it's unknown, but can you give us an example of what this could be? Like it's the risk, what these unknown risks could be.
So, for example, the engineers have come in 2015, they've dragged the chains, they've identified everything they thought was there, they think they've got it fixed. Whoops, this now 75-year-old structure, they didn't get it all, there's some more there, and so there's a risk that they're gonna have to go back and do more of that.
Okay.
Because it's gonna continue, I mean, it's 75-year-old concrete, the majority of it. Things are gonna continue to happen to it. We have a tough climate here, unfortunately.
So that cap partly, or I guess a lot of it, has a lot to do with the age of the structure.
In part, for sure.
So like brand-new parkades would be capped at what, in your opinion?
I would not cap them at 7 as the city does. I think brand-new parkades have to be capped higher. Certainly in the 7.5 to 7 3/4 range. Because they face the same set of unique issues. And my point is, and although I've accepted it for purposes of this hearing, the ratio that the assessor describes as having been extracted, I don't think it adequately takes into account the ongoing costs of how you deal with this unique type of structure for 2 reasons. One, from what she says, they're not getting a lot of data in this regard. And I don't think it's because parking lot owners aren't addressing or considering these issues, but I think a lot of these things frequently will find their way into their balance sheets as opposed to the income and expense statement. And, you know, people don't always understand the importance of what they're reporting and how it gets used. I think if they understood that better, you might find a lot more reporting of this information. So I'm concerned that that ratio, which removes this type of repair and cost, isn't a fair reflection of what the operating ratio is.
Okay, and just general statement, in your opinion, have capitalization rates compressed from last cycle to this, in general?
Yeah, and in general, I'm gonna say to you, I don't believe so, and here's why. So, the barometer for where capitalization rates are is very frequently where are interest rates. The Bank of Canada rate, and I have this in some of my other briefs, it's not in this one. The Bank of Canada rate increased between April 1 of 16 and April 1 of 18 by 75 basis points. You've probably heard that in some other submissions. So why will people think that capitalization rates are continuing to come down in the face of that increase in the main economic leader of where interest rates are going? And interest rates ultimately drive the real estate market in the sense that buyers, you know, we ignore financing, but the real world doesn't ignore financing. Financing is a very critical element of real world decisions because they have to make sure they can cover the debt that's always being put in place when properties are acquired. So I don't believe that capitalization rates have compressed, but I know the city believes it and we hear it with regularity.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Desire for summation?
I
Or do
just
you
have
follow-up
a
question?
redirect based on the conversation about cap rates for Mr. Newman. Is that permitted?
If it's got to do as a result of what has been said.
I'll save it for the next property line.
Desire for summation?
I don't really need one. I think we've sort of covered this very, very thoroughly. And I want to note, and I think Mr. Newman might agree, I did go through things very, very thoroughly with respect to cap rate and the questioning that happened. If you want us to continue going through it thoroughly, we can, but I think a lot of what we said
We can do
applies to
ask
the
and
general.
answered on the next property if it's applicable, something specific, we'll
Yes,
limit
exactly.
ourselves to that.
Yes.
Just the general, like, we'll go through probably
Right.
a little bit quicker.
Appreciate that. So does anyone need a break at this time, or can we forge ahead and do the next property?
I'm good to go if you are.
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you. Having said that, when you're ready, Mrs. Assessor, we'll hear from you regarding 131 Smith Street.
All right. 131 Smith Street is the address that we're looking at. The file number is 19-3129. The roll number is 12093256100. This is located On the east side of Smith Street, just north of Broadway, it's between York Avenue and Broadway, and it's just behind the Union Center located at 275 Broadway, and this is also known as the Union Center parking structure. We have a date of this parking structure of 1990 and 1999. I believe 1999 was when they added the third floor to the parking structure itself. We also have a land area of 25,051 square feet, and we have 225 parking stalls on file. We're recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $3,471,000. On page 2, you'll see aerial photos of the subject property showing its location as previously described. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. On page 4, you'll see income and expense information. On page 5, you'll see our income valuation summary for the subject property. We have 225 stalls with a monthly net unit rent of $90 a stall for a net operating income of $243,000 for an overall capitalization rate of 7% for a value of $3,471,000. If you look at my brief, 131 Smith Street is comparable number 13. They're reporting that they're making $88.09 a stall and have a 41% expense ratio. They have a monthly parking rate of $130 that is extremely low for downtown parking structures, and especially considering that parking lots that are in very close proximity are charging upwards of $185 to $200 a stall. They charge lower rates in our opinion because the tenants who park there on a monthly basis are the people who work at the Union Center. So it's a benefit to the building. And you'll notice also the rates that are shown for parking structures are significantly higher than the subject. You'll note that 329 Hargrave Street does charge $135 a stall. Those are subsidized rate that they do charge to the tenants of their building that work in the Alt Hotel office tower at that location, which again are below market rates as a benefit to the tenants who are working in the building or renting space in the building. On page 6, you'll see gross rates. These are typical gross rates for parking structures in the downtown. There is a number of them. I have up to 38 of them. The bottom one is 374 Taché, that is outside of the downtown. And the remainder of them, I believe, are all within the downtown. Other than the ones at the bottom, which are comparables 32 to 37, those are near the Health Sciences Center. On page 7, you'll see the income valuation summary. On page 8, you'll see cap rate information. On page 9, you'll see legislation information. On page 10, you'll see the income and expense mailer for 2017, showing the information that has been reported to us, which is how we derived that $88. On page 15, you'll see the 2006 income and expense mailer. I've included this just to show that they have not increased their rates very much in the past 2006 to 2018, 12 years. They were charging $100, and they were charging $100 at this property, I believe, all the way up until 2016 is when they increased their rates from $100. So they were charging $100 a stall there from 2006 to 2015, and then in 2016 they increased it to $130 and have not increased their rates since. And we have been seeing increased in rates for parking on the gross rate, because we also analyze gross rates for our model as well, and we've seen an increase in gross rates from the 2016 to 18 cycle as well as 18 to 2020. On page 9, you'll see I've included surface parking lots. The Union Center is managed by Impark, although they don't advertise monthly.
I'm sorry, what page?
19,
19.
sorry. This property is managed by Impark. There are Impark signs there, but they only offer casual parking, I believe, in the evening and not in the daytime. I think it's exclusively used for the tenants of the building. But on page 19, I've included some details of parking lots that are in close proximity. The first one is 116 Smith Street. This is directly across the street from the Union Center. If you look at my aerial photo, here is the Union Center on page 2, and across the street, that is the parking lot that we're looking at here. And they're charging $195 a stall. And I made a statement in our previous discussion that the rates that are charged for unheated parking structures and surface parking lots are very, very similar. So typically at parking structures that are unheated, they're charging rates like $195 a stall, and the subject lot is at $135. We believe it's significantly below market. Donald and York, they're charging $195, $215, $225. These are all surface parking lots in close proximity. Again, on Donald and Assiniboine, $185, $210, $195. Those are two properties that are on the south side of Broadway, so they're even further from the downtown than the Union Center. So our position is, this is a parking structure that is making $88, and I wanna say it exactly, $88.09 a stall with a 41% expense ratio, and they're charging significantly below market rates for their property. I believe we're assessing them at $90 a stall. I believe it probably should be higher than that, based on the information we have for surface lots. That being said, we're charging them $90 a stall, they're making $88.09, and they probably could be making a lot more if they were charging market rates for parking. It's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, questions for the assessor?
Just the connection between this parking structure and the Union Center office building. Am I correct that for areas not covered by the downtown zoning bylaw, where there is an adjacent parking lot on a separate roll that services an office building, the city will, depending on the individual circumstances, but in a general sense, recognize that connection and deduct the value of the parking lot from the value of the adjacent office building?
We look at it on a site-specific basis, and like you said, we analyze what's happening with the building and with the lot, what's going on and the connection that's there. We look at what's happening within the buildings, we look at the bylaws of how many parking stalls that are needed. But again, downtown does not require that, and that is a very different conversation because we're talking about the downtown, and the downtown zoning bylaw requires no parking to be on site.
So, and again, just so we're clear, and that's why I phrased my question in the general way that I did. But in a general sense, if you're outside the downtown zoning bylaw area and you have a separate roll parking lot that services an adjacent office building, in a general sense, the city will be prepared to consider and in some cases recognize the deduction of that parking lot value from the office building value.
Yes, because we have to follow what legally is in place, and the bylaw states that they need to have that, and we can't be ignorant to the fact that there's a bylaw in place indicating that they have that requirement. But the downtown zoning bylaw does not have that, and it is not a requirement, but for this particular property, I believe it doesn't really have a bearing on what we're talking about here today.
Well, except you noted at some length that you suggested the reasons that the parking rates are where they are is because it's the tenants of the Union Center office building who are using this parking lot, and you noted that that's why there's no casual parking available in this lot daytime.
Based on the information that I have before me and the history of this property and discussions in the past revolving this property and the research that I've done into parking, I believe that my assumptions are correct.
But your point is simply in the end, that because the downtown zoning bylaw does not require office buildings to have parking available, that even though there may be an economic connection, an operating connection, the city is not obligated to recognize that connection.
Correct.
Okay. Now, so this parking structure will, like the last one we discussed, be subject to all of the same considerations in terms of condition and concrete and need for repairs and all of that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And here again, we see the capitalization rate reducing from what was previously 7.5 down to 7% for all of the reasons that you've previously explained to us. Is that fair?
Yes, that is fair.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Are you suggesting that this particular property is not at market, there's subsidized rents for the tenants of the Union Center?
I don't know for sure, that is an assumption that I've made based on all the evidence in front of me, but what I do know for sure is that $130 a stall is not market levels that should be charged gross for parking, for service parking lots or unheated parking structures based on all the gross rates that I have looked at. It is definitely below market.
And no daily casual, but is there monthly available to the public?
Not that I can see, no. Impark doesn't actually advertise this parking lot on their website, but there are Impark signs on the property with meters there. So they don't actually advertise what their casual rates are or that they even have parking available, because if they did, I would have included it in this information.
So if it is subsidized, does that taken into consideration in valuing the adjacent office building? To capture the entire bundle of rights, if you're under market here, would that be attributable to income for the office building?
I can't speak to how the office building has been assessed. I believe we look at all of the properties, and this is me looking at the parking structure. I believe we capture the value of the parking structure at the parking structure and the value of the building at the building, although I have never defended or looked into anything that's happening at the subject at 275 Broadway at the Union Center. Those would probably be questions for Mr. Newman.
And is it fair to assume that age of the structure has no bearing on the cap rates for parking structures?
It is safe to assume that because of the low inventory that we have of parking structures and the very few sales that we have, it's hard enough to even talk about what a cap rate should be. As you can tell here today, Mr. Newman himself doesn't really have any information as to what a cap rate should be. There's no analysis in his information. There's just conversation about other property types, looking outside the box and looking at the information that we have. So I don't think it would be fair for us to start putting cap rates on this one, cap rates on that one because of the age, just because we're doing mass appraisal. And we don't have that information to start saying, okay, this information has guided us to a lower cap rate for this one. This information has guided us to a higher cap rate on this one. What we do know is 299 Fort was a parking structure that was in significant disrepair. There are levels of the parking structure that were heaving up, so the clearance of it were a lot lower. There was a huge engineering report, very similar to the one that we went through on the previous property at the Bay Parkade, with a number of remediations that needed to be done, that was all aware to the owner when it was purchased, and it still was purchased with a reported 8% cap rate. So we have to sort of look at things and decide what makes sense when we're doing mass appraisal. So I don't think we have enough information to start modeling different cap rates for different ages. So what we have to do is we apply the same cap rate to everyone, and that's how we do our model, and we try to capture things like ages of the property, location, all of those intangibles and sort of unknowns that we don't get reported to us within those net operating incomes that are applied.
So yes.
I think she did say that at the beginning. I think she did say it's safe to assume.
And you're saying that surface lots and parking structures are commanding the same rental rates?
Based on the analysis that we've done, if you look at, again, for our structures, when you look at the individual rates of the unheated structures, because some of them have a heated component to them as well, so you're really lowering that list that we have. But when you look at the gross rates alone of unheated structures, because I can separate out when I analyze what's reported on the Indigo website, the Impark website, FNP, I know which ones have just unheated parking structures. And when you look at the rates that they're charging versus the rates that surface parking lots are charging, and again, surface parking lots charge different rates in different areas, but in a general sense, because of a lot of our parking structures are in sort of the Exchange and or the core of downtown near the MTS Center, comparing those surface parking lots with the rates that are being charged, those are very, very similar and on par, which is why for the past 2 cycles, our unheated parking structure rate has been in line with our surface lot rate.
Right, and is it fair to assume that the expense ratio for surface would be significantly lower than for a parking structure?
It is not fair to assume that based on the information that we have, because there are different expenses involved in both of them, and on a different scale, a typical expense ratio for both are 45%.
And as far as risk, which is one of the main factors for a cap rate, I'm assuming, the surface parking lots are commanding a different cap rate?
Yes, they're at 4.5%.
That's downtown surface parking lots.
Those are the inner downtown surface parking lots, and the outer downtown, I believe, is at 5, and our suburban is at 6.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, take us through these. Princess again?
I love that picture.
And it's soon to be no more.
And they say by, maybe even by the end of this year, it'll be gone. I don't think so based on what I see, but. Okay, let's deal with my attachments again first. If you can go beyond the 4th page of the text, we start with the attachments numbered 1 in the lower right-hand corner. So the first one was simply the calculation of the assessment. Starting then at page 3 is a Crozier-Kilgore again doing a building condition assessment report. If you look at page 4, there's a heading there, parkade. Annual inspections of the parkade are recommended, has it been done in the past, to monitor the condition of the membrane and to complete repairs as required. And again, that's what I was saying before. They're doing this every single year. They talk about an ongoing allowance for repairs and eventual membrane replacement. So if we continue along, if you go to page 6 in the lower right-hand corner, they talk about the 3rd floor parking level, they talk about the membrane, they talk about it as being an acceptable condition. They talk about areas of membrane deterioration and localized concrete delamination were noted. Membrane deterioration of concrete spalling noted along the exterior walls of level 3 and the northwest vestibule. And I'm only pointing you to this just to illustrate the point I was making earlier, that it's an ongoing and constant process of monitoring. Below that, the ramp between the 2nd and 3rd levels, localized deterioration in the ramp membrane, recommendations on the next page, and they talk about the fact that annual inspections are necessary. The 4th bullet down, typical life expectancy of a urethane-based traffic-bearing waterproofing membrane varies, but is typically in the range of 5 to 7 years for heavy wear areas such as turning zones, and 12 to 15 years or more for parking stalls. So if we keep going, there were a set of repairs that they identified in 2016, and on page 9, you see my post-it, which reflects the total for the parkade of $416,000 of the items that were identified at that point in time that needed to be done. And you can see that it's general membrane repairs, recoating of turn zone membrane, recoating of drive aisle membrane, recoating of ramp membrane. So a variety of things noted. And I'll circle back to these issues. Page 10 is the operating history of this parking structure in terms of the revenues and expenses. And you can see that at the end of the day, the average 2013 to 2017 is just north of $215,000. I understand the assessor, and it won't surprise the panel members to know that the assessor and I have had the conversation previously about the connection between the zoning bylaw, downtown as opposed to outside the downtown area. But about that, all of that, I say simply, let's not lose sight of the fact that there is an economic connection between parking lots and buildings, which allow them to operate, and that's the situation we have here. If you then jump ahead to page 11, here's a report at August 1 of 18. Again, you see the heading Chain Drag Investigation, and again, it's what I've described to you previously. If you go to page 12, ramp between level 1 and level 2. The last line, localized ramp repairs are recommended in 2018, and they make reference to a photo, which I'll come back to in a moment. So then we keep going, we get to page 14, and here's an estimate of the work at August of 2018, and you can see the estimate totals $184,000, of which is item 2.3, discretionary work in 2018, full wear course recoding on P3 areas not repaired in 2016, and level 2 turning zone. So they were recognizing the fact that although the report had identified some items, it hadn't been done, and there's the cost of $184,000 to do this work. And again, you can see that the great majority of it is membrane and heavy-duty wear areas recoding. Then if you go to page 15, you start to see the photos, and again, just to illustrate, this is what I talked about earlier. Out comes that fluorescent paint, it gets marked, and you can see as you turn the pages what happens on page 16 in photo 3 and photo 4. The membrane starts to come apart, you get holes, it gets pitted, if that's the right word. And so that's what they have to continue to do. You see in photograph 8, the concrete delamination that wasn't previously repaired. All of this, again, simply to illustrate to you what I don't think there's a lot of dispute over, is that the unique nature of these parking structures and what needs to be done. So now we come to page 22, and this is the Crozier-Kilgore invoicing. And again, the only reason I'm providing it to you is simply to reflect the fact that this monitoring is an ongoing cost for those parking structure owners who are being diligent about trying to protect their asset. Page 23 is a report that now speaks to physical items that need to be done now, that have not yet been done. The stairs need to be replaced in the building or in the parking structure, and there's the estimated contract price of $204,000. So that's an ongoing item that needs to be addressed. If we jump ahead to page 26, again, July of 18, here's an estimate of $77,000 to redo membrane areas. And then if you go to page 27, and again, it's just to illustrate, these are the field observation reports. This is what the engineers do. They come out and they inspect the work and they make sure it's being done properly. And this is me saying to you that that membrane work, it's been done. It's not a deficiency as of today. But again, I want you to understand the process that these parking structures go through and what they're doing. We get at page 31 and 32, the same things I gave you previously. In the other matter about the Civic Arcade closure, the Artist REIT. And so now we get to page 36, which is my ultimate calculation of value. So now let me take you back to the text, and I'll explain to you what we did there, and then you've got the workup on the last page that we'll come back to as we complete this matter. So if you go to page 2 of my material, you'll see the heading Net Operating Income. I've told you and showed you already the history of the net operating income. I've showed you that there's net operating incomes of 222 or 230 in 16 or 17. The assessor is using $243,000. We've got $204,000 of costs to be incurred, ignoring engineering fees, ignoring interest. At the bottom of the page, I talk about waterproof membranes, and recently a portion of it was done at $85,000. And so what I end up doing is I take the $204,000, I take the $85,000, I amortize each of those items, and at the top of page 3, you can see I get an amortized total approximating $32,000, and I take that $32,000 and I deduct it from the average net operating income of $215,000, which is found on the spreadsheet that I had done of the historic revenues and expenses, which I'm having a problem finding at the moment, but I'll find it. It's page 10. So there's the $215,000 average over the years, and I deduct the amortized amount of these ongoing repair costs. I come to $183,000, and I capitalize that at 7.75%. I made a slight adjustment to the capitalization rate compared to the Bay based on the age, and that ultimately results in a value of $2,362,000. Those are my submissions.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, questions for the applicant?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Newman, you so kindly put the board order for the previous property in your brief. What did the board order say for this property from the 2018
I
cycle?
think the assessment was confirmed and it was appealed.
Okay. My next question for you, does this parking structure receive, since it's been built, ongoing repair and maintenance that are typical of a parking structure? Do they keep up with it? Do they defer their maintenance? Or are they on top of making, like, based on your photos, it looks like they're on top of repairing membranes. They make sure that they keep up with regular repair and maintenance schedules to keep their investment intact.
What I will say to you is that, I can't speak to what they did 30 years ago, but what I will say to you is over the last number of years, I think they are being diligent and proactive in terms of what they're doing.
And you'd agree that we're talking about the physical condition of a property as of January 1, 2020,
Yes,
with the economic costs of April 1st, 2018, correct?
yes.
So you have used a number of information in your brief, page 14, page 23. You cite it on your workup, I think on page 2. Those $204,000 and all of that information that you've included, those are all post-reference numbers, right?
So let's stop for a second. So page 14
Okay,
was some membrane, that $184,000 number is a number that I'm not using as part of my amortization of costs. I was simply putting it there to illustrate the process that's gone through, and all of this process would have been reflective as of the condition of April 1 of 18. So that's why that's there. But you are correct that the stair replacement, for example, is a current cost, and if the current cost between April 1 of 18 and July of 19 moved a little bit, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I don't know, but you're correct.
okay. No, I understand that you're using these as, to illustrate the physical condition, and I appreciate that. You just had mentioned a number of times the prices and the amounts and all of these dates that are post-reference, and I just wanted to acknowledge that we were both on the same page, that those are post-reference numbers.
We're on the same page.
Perfect. You talk about economic units, and you have so kindly discussed the city's position and how we look at things and what we've done on other properties with respect to looking at the suburbs. And you have acknowledged yourself that you do consider a lot of these properties as one economic unit, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What is the cap rate on the building for this at 275 Broadway?
I think it came out at either, it may have come out at 6.75, because I think generally that's the cap rate for B-class buildings. It was appealed and it was moved up by the Board of Revision. I can't, as I sit here, remember the exact number, but I think it moved perhaps to 7.
And when you make arguments about economic units, in a general sense on other properties, you typically, for example, parking lots, if you argue an economic unit with a building, do you ask for the building cap rate to be placed on the parking lot?
I have on occasion, but I found that in a general sense, thus far, and I think ultimately a higher body will have to rule on this issue, thus far in the face of the arguments that there's, in the downtown area, the parking is not required by the bylaw, I have found generally that the panels have been unwilling to do that, and that's why I say it'll have to get dealt with higher.
So you wouldn't request that there should be a general cap rate for both the properties that are the same? You would argue that the cap rate for the parking structure should be higher?
So, and sometimes it's a surface lot that's adjacent, and sometimes it's a parking structure that's adjacent. The parking structures adjacent are much fewer in number, obviously. And this one is a little bit different in the sense that it's not really public parking the way a lot of them are, which simply reinforces the connection. With the surface lots, because the cap rates are so much lower, of course, than typically the building lots are, again, there's been a reluctance and willingness on the part of panels to do that. So, yes, I would argue for it, but it isn't working thus far, and so I'm not really pushing that issue.
Talking about parking lots and parking structures attached to buildings as one economic unit, are you familiar with 200 Waterfront?
Yes.
Does it have an attached parking structure to it?
Yes.
Is it, so cars come in, bring in salt and water, it's below grade parking to the building, correct?
Yeah,
Did you argue the cap rate on that property for
I
the
did.
parking structure?
I did not.
Okay,
It's a much smaller lot in terms of number of stalls, much different.
okay. But same issues though, cars are coming in, concrete issues, risk involved, repairing membranes, using the chains to make sure that there's not hollow sounds coming from the concrete, from rust. Same sort of thing?
All potentially there, yes.
Okay. Looking at the, I think it's your page 10, yeah. So if you're looking at the repair and maintenance lines, they have $18,000, $24,000, $35,000, $36,000, $23,000, $22,000. And then you've used on your workup on the last page of your brief, your amortized value of $32,000. Do those repair and maintenance expenses include some of those costs? Like, would they include repairing membranes in any of these years, or repairs to concrete or anything? Do you know what's included in any of these repair and maintenance figures that you've
I don't
quoted?
have the detail of it here, but, you know, just based on the numbers we've seen, for example, where there's $84,000 or $184,000, clearly those repair and maintenance lines aren't including that type of item.
So my next question is, you have a lot of detailed information on the work that needs to be done, but you have also just acknowledged that you don't have any detailed information on repair and maintenance work that has been done. You haven't gone and investigated and asked the owner what any of these repair and maintenances are, or you haven't asked them to see the costs that they've paid to date with respect to what's been done, you know, in the past, say, 5-6 years. We're talking on a long-term scale looking into the future, but have you asked the questions to the owner of, what have you done? How much have you spent on this property each year? What work has been done? Have you repaired membranes? Have you worked on the turning aisles? That sort of stuff. You have a lot of detailed information looking into the future, but I'm just wondering where in your brief, if you do have any information, or if you've asked the question of what has been done.
So I've asked the question in a general sense. I've been doing this structure for the last 2-3 cycles, I believe. And I'm not aware that prior to, let's say 2015, when we start to see the Crozier reports, I'm not aware that they were as proactive and as diligent as they are now. Again, I think there's an awareness that's arising in the property management industry generally about the importance of this and the risk if it's not attended to.
And to just sort of mirror a question that was asked of me by one of the panel members, because you have dealt with the building at 275 Broadway, does the city ever take into account and apply higher rents and argue that the rent should be significantly higher because of the parking that's here, or do we look at it as separate?
I've not seen the city argue that the rents should be higher. I think, and I think you mentioned in the context of one of the downtown lots that there's subsidized parking given to the tenants. I think the reality is, for some buildings, if you're going to get your tenant in, you need to provide a package, and some of that will be the office space itself, some of that will be access to parking. Occasionally it might even be free parking, but if it's not free parking, it might be, for example, at 275 Broadway on the main floor now, there's a restaurant called Capitol Grill. And I'm aware that when you go into the surface parking lot that's beside the 275 Broadway, which is part of that value, there are stalls that are reserved for customers of the Capitol Grill. Restaurants need places for their customers to park. So, that's an arrangement that was put in place in the context of that site, but that allows them to then get the rent they're getting out of the tenant, and that's the point I'm making ultimately. Landlords have to do trade-offs sometimes to be able to get the tenant in and get the rent.
So you would agree that $130 is a little below market for parking, for monthly parking?
I'll agree that there's many surrounding lots that are achieving more, but I'll say to you that that's what has to be done to keep the building full.
I think those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre.
I have no questions.
I was going to ask about the bundle of rights, but you've answered that. Your amortized amount of $32,521,
Yeah,
that's of deferred maintenance?
that's what's visible today as being required to be done.
Right.
Right.
So that's to bring it up, and you've amortized that over 10 years?
Yes.
And then you're of the opinion that, well, you haven't really accepted the NOI, but you've accepted the expense ratio on that NOI, or?
Well, what I've done is I've actually used a different starting point
Right.
on the NOI, because I've used $215,000, which if you go back to page 10, is that average of the years 13 through 17.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the cap rate of 7.75%, are you recognizing the age of the structure? That's
Yeah, and
that's
that-
where your quarter point
Yes.
comes in?
Yes.
I think so.
Thank you all.
Desire for a summation on this property or general for the two properties?
I think we've gone through it very, very thoroughly.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Noonan.
Thank you.
The orders will come out in due course. Thank you for your presentations.
Thank you.
We will take a short break, say 10 minutes. I'll call the hearing back to order. Have you swear the applicant in, please?
Would you like to swear or not affirm?
Swearing.
Please state your full name.
Sid Story.
And you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Here.
Morning, Mr. Story.
Good morning.
You're representing the owners for 5 properties,
Yes, same owner.
and in each circumstance, is it just the amount of assessed value we're dealing with?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. We'll just hear them as they are listed on the docket. So the first one we'll hear is 295 Gary. When you're ready, please, Mrs. Assessor.
Perfect. All right, as stated, we're looking at 295 Gary Street. This is a parking structure located on the west side of Gary Street, just south of Portage Avenue. The file number is 19-4289 and the roll number is 12097803635. This is a parking structure that has 60 indoor underground heated parking stalls as well as 315 outdoor unheated parking stalls. Also in this building, there's a restaurant. There's a small 564 square foot restaurant that is located in its own little space in the parking structure. And I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $7,132,000. On page 2, you'll see aerial photos of the subject property showing its location on Portage Avenue and Gary Street. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. So the top photo is a view of Portage of the unheated above ground stalls. The second picture is a view of the sort of turning aisle for them to get up to the other floors. And also you'll note that that small sort of bottom part with the windows, that is the restaurant. And on page 3, this is a view of the structure from the back on Fort Street. On page 4, you'll see request for income and expense information, subject sale history. Again, this sale included different parts of the building as well that was separated off, so we have not considered that sale. On page 5, you'll see the income valuation summary for the parking structure. We have 315 stalls at our monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall. That's the typical unheated rate that we've applied to parking structures in this area of the downtown, in close proximity to the MTS Center. We have 60 heated parking stalls that are at $138 a stall. That is the model rate that is applied to, again, parking structures with heated stalls in similar areas in close proximity to the MTS Center. We have a 7% cap rate for a capitalized value of $7,008,000. On page 5, you will see income and expense information for a number of parking structures in the downtown. We have a mailer for the subject property, but it was not for the full year. So we haven't included that information in the chart or modeling parameters just because it was not for a full year of income. Because a share sale took place on this property, I believe on September 30th, 2017. So this property changed hands at that time, and previous to that, we didn't have any income and expense information reported to us. Subsequent to that, the owner has now reported information, but we haven't used it in our modeling parameters just because it's not for a full year, at least for the 2020 assessment, reassessment cycle. When you're looking at heated and unheated parking structures that have similar breakdowns to this one, 136 McDermott is a good example, and they're getting $150.06 a stall. If you're looking at parking structures that are in close proximity, we have 266 Hargrave that is only unheated, and they're making $121.61, and that is probably the closest parking structure in proximity to this one that is on this list of comparables. 329 Hargrave, again, is in close proximity. It's a little bit further than 266 Hargrave. Actually, it's probably equal distance, but again, 329 Hargrave is offering a number of subsidized rates to a number of their tenants for a large portion of the stalls. On page 6, you'll see gross rates that are typical of downtown parking structures. And on page 7, you'll see the income valuation summary for the restaurant. We have it classified as a retail property with a leasable area of 562 square feet. We have a model rent of $18.11. We have a vacancy, which is a model parameter of 6%, and a 2% expenses. Again, we use 2% for the 2020 reassessment cycle for expenses, for a net operating income of $9,157. An overall cap rate for typical retail property types is 7.4%, for an estimated value of $124,000. On the bottom of my page 7, I've included a number of comparables for smaller size restaurants that are in close proximity to the subject property. And they range from $14.50 upwards of $70.65. Those $70 and $65 are in City Place. Those are food court rates. As you can see, they're significantly higher. which is why the average is being skewed by those numbers upwards of $26. And the median we have on these properties is $16.22. On page 8, you'll see the income valuation summaries of both income streams for a total value of $7,132,000. On page 9, you'll see our cap rate information. This is a number of different property types, and clearly there are no parking structures on this chart. This is just to show people what we're applying in our model based on what is being analyzed by other companies and how our model is performing based on what is being seen and analyzed by other people. On page 10, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. On page 11 through 12 and 13 and 14, you'll see the mailer that was submitted. On page 15, this is the information. It's for September 2017 to December 2017, so it's only for 4 months of the year. You'll note on the mailer itself, there are not a lot of expenses. We have commercial retail rent that says that it's renting for year-to-date actual of $6,100, which is for those 4 months. We have parking, which again is for the 4 months. And then the information, we have insurance, interest and bank charges, property taxes, property tax appeals. There's really no expenses on this for the property, including the parking structure. There would be a lot more expenses for a lot of things happening. Typically when we see income and expense mailers for parking lots and parking structures that look like this, the management company is the person who's responsible for paying a lot of those expenses on a property. So when you look at a parking lot, IMPark typically won't pay insurance, won't pay property taxes. So those are really the only things, and when in those cases what happens is we call them land leases. IMPark is leasing the property and they're taking responsibility for the income that's generated as well as the expenses, and the owner is receiving sort of a rent just on the base of the property. So when you look at this income and expense mailer, insurance and property taxes, we don't usually include interest or bank charges, we don't include property tax appeals, but insurance and property taxes are really the only things that the owner are reporting for expenses that they have. They don't report any information on utility costs for the restaurant, utility costs for the parking structure, none of that is being reported. Also, if you look on page 16, you see the lease with IMPark. You also see the lease for the restaurant. It indicates that it's a net rent. If you look on the far where it says lease ID, it says retail net. It says that it's a step-up lease, that at the beginning of the lease they were paying $21.35 net, and it steps up in 2016 to $32. And in 2017 to $42.70. It's our opinion that this is a net lease that's in place, and that because it is a separate building, again, we don't have any information indicating otherwise, but we have not contacted someone who has filled this out, but it looks like, based on what's reported, that this is a net lease, and that a number of the expenses that probably pertain to the business are being mailed to them directly and being paid by the tenants. On page 19, you'll see the parking information. They have a range of parking rates that range from $165. That's for the rooftop. They have a reserved above ground, which is $190, and they have a random rate of $180, and then the underground portion of the parking structure, which is heated, is $210. They also offer hourly, daily, casual, evening, weekend, and event rates at this property. And they're indicating that the number of spaces that IMPark says is 376, which we are assessing for 375. On page 21, we have our addenda information that's added to our briefs. We again talk about the fresh look that we have taken for the 2020 reassessment cycle, where we look at information that has come in from owners and we review it on a reassessment cycle basis. The capitalization rate evidence that we have placed in our brief. And then on page 25, we have the non-recoverable expense study. If you look back to my page 7, you'll notice that our expenses are 2%. Our expenses that are at 2% are our non-recoverable expenses. We no longer have a management expense of 5%. Our rents that we have in our model are net of that management expense. We've been noticing in mailers that the rents that are in place are net of management. Those are recovered already from the owners, and we have done, provided here some research as to what some non-recoverable expenses are from a sampling of properties with a median of 1.06%. Our general 2% is for non-recoverables. That does not include tenant inducements and things like that. So we have applied that expense of 2% to the model. Again, when you look at the mailer, it's indicating that it's a net rent, and the owner actually hasn't reported anything other than property taxes or insurance on the mailer. So they haven't even included expenses that are in place for the parking structure itself. So it's hard to analyze what's going on with this mailer because the owner hasn't actually provided any information as to what their non-recoverables are or aren't. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Story, questions for the assessor?
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. You've dealt with this property, I presume, for a number of years as well?
I believe the past 2 cycles, yes.
Past 2 cycles. Okay. And you indicated there was a sale, you were unable to get any information on the sale?
When this property sold at the time of sale, we didn't have any income and expense information on it. The owner who previous to, if we're talking about the first sale that happened in 2014, that was for a building, there were a bunch of different things involved. It had subsequently been replotted and separated out into a number of different areas, which had then been sold off. And then the share sale, we have no information on that. And previous to the share sale, the owner who purchased the parking structure did not report any income and expense information for the parking structure. We actually had to go for non-compliance on this property last cycle, which was granted because the owner had not reported anything to our department.
Okay. So you don't have any sale information, and you presumably didn't look very far to get it. You searched to try to find it. Is that what you're saying?
We sent out sales mailers to the owner and they did not report
They did not
anything
respond.
to us.
And you indicated that there was a non-compliance issue. Was there also a decision at the board of revision last cycle about the time of that sale?
In what sense?
Cap rate?
For the subject property?
Yes. 218.
The non-cooperation was allowed and my recommendation that I made on the property was accepted, and so I used the model parameters and the cap rate would have been the modeled cap rate at 7.5%.
7.5 last year. And was there not identifiable deferred maintenance in the structure when it was acquired?
There actually wasn't a brief submitted by the applicant. The only brief that was submitted by the applicant was on the non-cooperation argument, because the agent at the time had been authorized, I think, 2 or 3 days before the hearing. So at the time of the exchange, the owner who had filed the appeal didn't actually exchange any information.
Okay, so this isn't Artis, this is a previous owner.
Yes.
And, okay. So just looking at the questionnaire, let's go to it for a moment. Excuse me. So the questionnaire has a response. It shows a financial statement for the period that the owner owned it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is it page 15 you're looking for?
Yeah.
Mr. Story?
Can't find it, I know small printing, but there it is. So, if one were to look at this, it's showing that for the 4-month period, it did 185,000 in revenue. If you analyze that, or annualize it, would be about 555,000. Did you go through that exercise? Or try to project what the year would be, or did you just go directly to your model?
What do you mean?
Well, You have a questionnaire
Yes.
responded to by the owners, but it only runs, and I apologize for the print because I can't read it. It only runs from September 1st until December 31.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 185,000 in gross revenue and 138,000 in NOI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So then if one were to take that and extend it over, project it for a year, rather than 4 months for 12 months, it'd be 555 with 140, be about a $414,000 NOI. Did you do any analysis in that regard? What you're saying is you didn't have any access to sales information, so you don't have anything to provide the board or myself that would substantiate the cap rate.
No, we don't have any cap rate information, because again, we have no, if you look on my page, we don't even have the sale listed on page 4, because it was a share sale, so it didn't actually go through land titles. The reason I know there was a share sale was because the agent, who is yourself, Mr. Story, who came in to represent the 2018 appeal for the new owner, which is Artis, had indicated that the share sale had taken place, and then the evidence that they presented to the board with respect to the non-cooperation argument was the information of the change of directors from the company. It's still owned by 295 Gary Street Inc., which it was previously. 295 Gary Street Inc. still owns it, but the directors within that company changed hands.
Okay. I guess the question was, did you do any analysis, or did you look at trying to stabilize the income because you didn't have a full year?
I can do it right now, I don't have it written down,
Well,
but
I
I
tell you,
can.
it's 555, 327 would be the gross.
Well, what I,
140, 421 would be expenses.
Oh, okay, the question was, did you do it? The answer was no, you didn't.
no, I didn't forecast it, but I
Okay.
did break it down if I was to take, so essentially what I normally do when I'm looking at the net operating income for a property, I would take the income for the parking, which is $178,000. I would subtract insurance, I would subtract property taxes, and I would divide by the number of stalls divided by 12. I would then, in this case, divide by the number of stalls divided by 4 to come out on a per stall rate of what they made versus our model. I did not project it to what it would be for a year. I would have taken the actuals for the 4 months and worked it down to a per stall rate on the 4 months.
And as a result, you come to a 490 NOI.
No, because I
Based
didn't
on your
do that.
model. Well, however you did it. You came to 490. So let's just talk about the sale again. So we have no information on that particular sale, and you've had quite extensive conversation today that there aren't many transactions in this, in the parkade business. And the only other one you referenced was 299 Fort Street?
Yes.
Big Square? And what do you know about that sale?
I know that it was reported at 8%. I know that there was a lot of remediation that needed to be involved. The parking structure at the time was in disrepair. It sold from the city.
Are you aware that they'd had a $325,000 a year land air rights lease that Parkade recovered as part of that 8%?
There's been talk that there were air rights involved and there were leases in place that were happening, yes, but I don't know all of the details with respect to prices.
Okay. So if in fact there was an air rights lease of $325,000 a year, that when they acquired the parking structure and revenue, they were in fact also acquiring something else, which is the elimination of those air rights, because they own the building, correct?
Possibly.
The air rights is a building, okay. So that was 8% minus whatever the value of the deferred maintenance that was required. The city required the owner, or any owner who wanted to bid on it, to sign off on a Jones Christopherson, you've seen it many times, Jones Christopherson report that said it needed $5.4 million in immediate maintenance for deferred maintenance problems. Do you recall that?
I don't have the numbers in front of
But
me,
there
but
was
yes,
an
I did
engineering
know there was an
report.
engineering report and there was a lot of deferred maintenance that needed to happen. Yes, I've stated that.
So is there any evidence then, other than the 8% on the sale in 2010, by the way? And you also had a motivated purchaser. They owned the building above it, and they paid the air rights lease, so they were motivated. So was any weight put on that sale or none?
Well, we look at the sale, you have to, when you have information, you look at the information you have. In a perfect world, you have perfect information that exists, that there's, people report on income, we have perfect stuff to look at. But in the world of appraisal, perfect information doesn't exist. So you have to look at what you have, and you have to look at it with a critical eye, and you have to make reasonable judgments, similar to the reasonable appraiser test. You have to look at the information you have in front of you, which is, we have a sale that had a reported cap rate. It was reported at 8%. There could have been a number of things involved with it, but it was for a parking structure with a reported cap rate of 8%. Yes, we're not denying that there were things wrong with it. Yes, we're not denying that there may have been other things involved. Yes, we're not denying that there could have been a motivated
And if we
purchaser.
just,
But-
can I ask you, can I just simplify the question?
Do you want,
So that was the last sale that you have, was 8%. And any of this information that you're sharing with the board today, or you have for the last several years, has not been supported by any sales. The cap rate adjustments upward or downward have not been supported by any sales, other than a sale that you just talked about, all the different inputs that have to be considered that weren't perhaps.
no,
The 8%, the deferred maintenance that had to be done, the motivated purchaser, the fact that the lower level wasn't included in that, and the lower level by your admission in the last hearing, or in the last hearing this morning, was that the floor plate had lifted. It actually is listed 8 inches in the third floor parkade. You mentioned that earlier in your dissertation, do you recall?
I didn't talk anything about 4 inches. I said that the ground had
No,
heaved
you
and
said
it had
4
clearance
inches.
issues.
I said that you did mention that there were, that one of the maintenance issues with 299 was the floor had lifted. The bottom slab had risen, correct? And it had risen at the time of the purchase as well. It was still, that had happened already. So there's a whole bunch of influences there, including an air rights lease, including this, that, and the other thing, that's factored into that. So is that that may be the reason that little or no weight was put on that sale?
Well, to answer your first question before we went into the discussion on 299 Ford, if we've placed only the weight on the one sale at 299 Ford at 8%, no, that is not accurate at all.
Okay.
As I've described, we look at when an appraiser has information or an assessor, and you have one sale, you have to use logic. One sale doesn't develop a market. So logically, what would you do? You would look to other things. You would look to what is happening in other property types. What are cap rates on other property types, improved properties? What are cap rates on other downtown property types? What are happening with those cap rates? Since 2010, have cap rates been compressing? Absolutely. That's very clear. Since 2010, cap rates have been compressing. But there are other sales that the city looks at. We don't just say, okay, well, 299 Fort sold it at 8% cap rate, that's definitely what our cap rate is. We've looked at other cap rates and we've used logic to decide what we think is appropriate, thinking about the realities of what parking structures are. You know, we haven't decided, oh, our cap rate information that we have on this page shows that a bunch of different property types are in and around 5-6%. Let's put 6% on it. No, we've used logic and we understand that parking structures have higher risks than other property types, and we have higher cap rates to reflect that. But no, we haven't just looked at one sale and decided that's what it is. We look at other cap rates and other property types and use reason and judgment and logic and sales of other property types to form an opinion and think about what's happening.
What justification did you use to reduce cap rates from 7.5% to 7% on these parkades from last cycle to this cycle? What sales supported it? What information supports it?
If you look at cap rates on parking structures since I believe 2012, we had 8%. So from 2012 to 2020, we have gone from 8% to 7%. That's 2012 reassessment, 2014, 2016, 2018, 2020. In 5 reassessments, we have moved 1 basis point on the cap rate for parking structures.
And do you know why your 212, why the cap rates were the cap rates? Have you
I
heard of the
was-
host buildings were establishing the cap rates in those days?
I was not involved in our reassessment in 2012. I think I had just been hired by the assessment department in
But that
2012.
would explain if it's the host buildings, when you had one, not this property, 170 McDermott, was next door to the grain exchange building. It was on the other side was the Hamilton Bank building, and in those days, and they're still doing it in Calgary, as a matter of fact, we're doing one today in Calgary, a parking lot. They still use the host buildings, closest buildings cap rates. You don't do that here, do you?
When I say the 8% that was used in 2012, that was the modeled cap rate for parking structures, not what the host building was or what was applied to individual parking structures. Our model was 8%.
And was
So
it
my
based on
point-
sales in 2012?
To let me finish answering the
Okay,
question that you
go ahead.
first asked,
All right.
was how can we justify going from 7.5% to 7%? Looking at the whole span, from 2012, we've gone from 8% to 7%.
Mhm.
In 2014, we were at 7.75. In 2016, we were 7.5. In 2018, we were at 7.5. And in 2020, we're at 7. So we have moved 1 basis point in 5 cycles. And
Okay,
we've
but where's the
definitely been
evidence?
seeing.
That's not evidence, that's your opinion.
I'm just explaining what our model is. You're
Okay,
asking.
okay. So
what
you have
we're
no, so you have no sales information to support the reduction in the cap rate, is that what you're saying?
I have not presented sales information with respect to parking structures in particular, other than verbal information. I have presented sales information with cap rates here today and in my brief.
And are you suggesting that the page with the, you're doing multi-tenant earlier, are those part of the reason that you made that decision to reduce the cap rate, or the city made the decision to reduce the cap rate on parkades? Because of
No,
those multifamily?
I can get into my presentation again, but as I stated previously, we've been seeing reductions in cap rates when you look at actual sales from cycle to cycle of other property types, as well as what's been reported by companies. We've been seeing compression in cap rates from actual sales, as well as what's being reported from companies.
If a parking structure had a capital replacement reserve, would that affect the cap rate?
In what sense?
Well, if you don't have a capital replacement reserve, you don't know what's coming around the corner, that's risk.
Okay,
In other jurisdictions, the recognition or cap rate is influenced by whether or not a capital replacement exists. Are the people putting away the money for things like the membrane and for the laminating concrete, et cetera, et cetera? The value is being adjusted for that. Has the city of Winnipeg ever considered that option?
I can't speak to what other jurisdictions are doing, and I can't speak to, if people are reporting capital cost allowances on their mailers. I know that that's not something that we see a lot
No,
of.
not capital cost allowance. I'm talking about capital replacement reserve.
Okay,
Recognizing that they're going to have to spend some money. The income approach is supposed to simulate an investment. You put $1 out and you get back 10 cents a year for so many years. It doesn't assume that you're going to put $1 out and then every year put more money to chase it to maintain that.
okay, to answer that question then, with respect to the comparables that I have brought forward for you today on page 5, these are comparables that I personally have analyzed and put together. I reviewed every single mailer on every single one of these properties. And I can tell you, I do not do many adjustments to these properties.
Well, what do you mean you do?
No, let me finish. Thank you, Mr.
I'm asking
Story.
about capital
No,
replacement
and
reserve. You're
I'm
talking
answering
about
that,
the
I'm
rent
answering
comparables?
that question, if you would let me finish. Mr. Chairman, if I can be permitted to continue, I'm the one who stabilized these net operating incomes. Because we get such a range of information from property owners for parking lots, I don't have my fingers in this willy-nilly removing things. If someone's reported a capital cost reserve in this, it would have been left in this. Typical expenses that get stabilized out are things that are never considered. Things like interest and bank charges. We don't consider those on anything. We don't consider tenant inducements. We remove things that are not considered. With respect to a property that we previously discussed today, when something shows up that I know to be incorrect, I phone the owner and I ask and remove it. And the Bay Parkade was a separate situation. But typically, I'm not removing things from repair and maintenance lines, I'm not removing capital cost reserves. We're lucky with the information we receive from parking owners. We try to use it as it is. So I haven't been removing capital reserve allowances. If it's responded on a mailer, even if 1 in 10 parking structures report it, I leave it there. Because I'm trying to show the information to the panels. This is the information that's being reported to us. We haven't made up these numbers. These are from mailers. And if you look at any single property that we have today, I can take you through the exact calculations of what I've included and haven't included, and you can count that the number that I've shown on this chart, you can calculate it directly from that mailer. And if you can't, I can explain why.
2 questions. Do you know what a capital replacement reserve is? No, just yes or no, please.
I do,
you know what
Mr.
it
Story.
is?
Would you like to explain it to the panel?
No, I'm asking, do you know what it is?
Yes.
I'm just asking.
My answer is
It's the
yes.
it's the underpinning of how these difficult properties are handled everywhere from a valuation point of view. You just asked the question.
Mr. Story, sorry, you asked the question, she said yes. Do you have a follow-up question to that?
Well, I didn't hear what you said. Do
She
you
said
understand
yes.
what a capital replacement reserve is? You said yes?
I believe I'd answer that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Secondly, would the cap rate applied for value be different if there was an appropriate capital replacement allowance on the property?
I can't answer that question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. That's fine.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
Any permits on the parking? Since we've heard this morning from the previous 2 about this maintenance issues.
One from 2007, where they did some repairs to an existing 6-level parkade. Alterations in 2009 to convert retail space to a parking garage, so they converted some of their retail space on the main floor of that building that I said was separated out. They created a new opening, they constructed a new access ramp, and then we have a clerical inquiry in 2019, so no.
Okay, that's all my questions.
I don't have any questions. Mr. Story, we'll hear from you, please.
Yes, just, Mr. Chair, I accept the small restaurant. It's not contested.
Okay, thank you.
It was formerly, in my day, it was a Salisbury House, and I remember it fondly, so it's not being contested.
So the crux of your presentation will be regarding the parkade itself.
Yes, only the, just 1 second, I just want to get myself up to speed. Thank you, Jim. Sorry. I'll just turn you quickly to page 3 of our brief. And our suggestion is that the city's 7% cap rate is inappropriate. We're accepting everything else, and we're asking for this property to have a cap rate of 8.5% based on its age. It was built in 1963. It's 56 years old. It's partially heated and partially unheated. It has a bit of a scary ramping system, and that I believe might be reflected in some of the revenue. We only have some partial numbers there. My big concern today, and maybe I should address them all at once, is the cap rate. The cap rate went from 7.5 to 7%. I don't think there's evidence to support that. The onus is on the assessor. I don't think they've done a job of, other than the fact that what we think is, cap rates are compressing. I don't necessarily agree that cap rates are compressing. So I'm arguing that. We've got 8.5% here. The other briefs we're asking for is 8%. We did this because we think it's an inferior property, it's inferior, it's not connected to the skywalks in any way. It's older. It's on a street that has an area, part of the street that's fairly undesirable. So I'm asking for an 8.5 cap rate, and we've suggested the assessed value should be $5,771,647. The real argument we're advancing is that we shouldn't have to guess on these cap rates and count on the city, and Ms. Warren does a wonderful job, she's very thorough, but we can't rely on her assumptions or her interpretation of evidence or lack of evidence as to make these fairly substantial adjustments to values. So I think that there has to be evidence to support the move in that cap rate. I think that the 7 and 7.5 from the previous year is too low. I think cap rates are 8+ on parking garages for all the reasons that Mr. Newman mentioned, and all of the things that my client sees in maintaining all of their parking lots. Today we're doing one's accepted, but 4 parking lots. 2 of them were built in the 60s. One was built in 2012, the other was built in 1978. And they're very hard properties to own, hard to maintain, require a great deal of monitoring because of the nature. You're putting heat with moisture, with salt, with sand, with steel, with concrete. And so I think that even the 8% is probably on the low side, but there's no justification for the move from 7.5 from the previous cycle. So I request that that be considered by the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comment for presentation.
Questions?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to clarify, you said you're accepting our value of $124,000 on the restaurant portion, correct?
Yes.
So would you agree your new value that you're requesting before the board here today is $5,895,000?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I have my notes
Yeah,
correct.
sorry, I didn't explain that.
My next question is, so you indicated that the parking structure is very, very old, it was built in,
63, and I think they
1963?
say it was updated because there's an effective age of 74, as I recall.
With respect to this parking structure, what do you know about it? Have the stalls, 375 stalls, been existent since 1963?
I can't say, I don't know.
Okay, so you aren't aware that the basement portion, the heated stalls, were changed from office space, the permit that I referenced, and turned to the unheated or the heated parking structures in 2012. So would you not agree that 16% of that parking structure, if you're looking at the total number of stalls versus how many are new, is much newer than 1963?
Sure.
Okay, so you weren't aware that they did that?
Well, I was involved in the purchase, and in the
But-
purchase, the building was in the process of being condominiumized, as I recall. There was also another big issue, is that the building, when they split it up from the parkade, the elevators went with the building, not with the parkade. So there's huge risk associated with this building. It's built in 1963.
But sorry, I don't think that was my question. My question
Your
was.
question, did I know that in
Were you aware?
2012,
Yes.
that they converted the lower level to parking?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. My question to you, you're the agent for the owner who acquired the property. Do you know how much the owner paid to acquire the shares of this parking structure from the previous directors of 295 Gary Street?
You know, I know a cap rate, but I don't know an amount. And the reason I don't know an amount is I believe that the vendor put in some money to remedy some of the shortcomings at the time. But I don't know the exact amount, but I'm told that the cap rate was in the high 7.75.
So the cap rate was at the high 7.75, okay? So if that's the cap rate that the owner accepted, what is the calculation to come up with a cap rate? Does that not include sale price? So if they've come up with 7.75 as a cap rate,
Yes, but there's a this was a shared transaction, so they did something whereby some of the identifiable deferred maintenance, some of the elevator, I think, issues were solved in that. There were some transactions where the vendor was putting some money back in, I presume.
you presume you don't have any
No, I don't know.
information on that?
I know there was a sale, and I know the reason for the sale, and that, if you'd like to know that, it's because they were contemplating making an offer on the Bank of Nova Scotia building, which has no parking, right on the corner of Portage and Main.
Okay.
And they tried to accumulate parking as close as they could to their properties. Also, they're motivated purchasers. They're redeveloping 4th Street. They own 220 Portage. They own 360. They own they own all those buildings in that area, 191 Pioneer, 333. So the parking, they were motivated purchasers on that particular property.
So you yourself have not done a cap rate analysis where you've reviewed the income on the property,
No.
reviewed the sale price to come up with a cap rate on your own?
No,
Okay.
they bought it to have parking for a building they were gonna bid on, and they did bid on it, but didn't get it.
No, that wasn't my question. My question was, you haven't
I have
gone
not.
through the exercise
No
of
reason to.
calculating a cap rate?
No.
No reason to?
No.
Would the reason not be to decide what appropriate cap
Well,
rate should
first of
be?
all, you understand that the city doesn't recognize share sales. So if I had gone through the exercise for your benefit and gave you the information, you'd object to it.
No, I think I've said repeatedly in this hearing here today, in the absence of information, any information being looked at with a critical eye is helpful when there's no information.
Well, the city, one also assumes that the city is, the assessors from the city are part of the city. There's another sale of an apartment building, or of a parking structure. An offer has been accepted during the due diligence period. It's been announced all through the newspapers. So one would assume you're aware of what's selling and what isn't selling.
Not sure. I'll
Well,
just move on,
yeah,
just because
yeah.
I'm not sure that I actually asked a question there that was answered,
Well,
but
I think you indicated.
my next question, Mr. Chairman, is, Mr. Story, do you have any information that you've put together in your brief to show what market rental rates, it looks like you're accepting ours for the market rental rates
Yes,
for parking?
we're contesting the cap rate.
Okay,
And particularly,
Nope, I think
specifically,
you've
the
answered.
reduction from 7.5 to 7.
okay.
Yeah, let's just deal with the cap rate issue.
That's all it is. All the other stuff is non-issue.
I think it was just leading to sort of my next question, sorry,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Your 8.5% for cap rate, how have you arrived at that? Have you analyzed sales for cap rates to come up with that 8.5%?
The only sale, as you're well aware, is from 2010, that's 9 years ago. And that was a motivated purchaser who were buying the foundation of their building. So that was the only sale. There's no other sales to analyze.
So you're saying that you placed all your weight to arrive from 8.5% on a 2010
No,
sale?
I'm
All of
placing
your
my
weight is
weight on the
placed?
fact is there are no sales to support your reduction in cap rate. That's my position.
I'm asking,
No, I don't have.
Where
any.
your
The only sale- I know
8.5
what
came
the
from.
sales were and what they were motivated purchasers. They bought at a particular cap rate that nobody else would pay because they were motivated based on, they owned the building. They have the air rights lease that they had to deal with. And they have had plans to expand 360 Main, which they're now doing.
okay, so again, I think I'll ask this because I'm not sure I'm getting the answer. Have you placed all of your weight on that 8% or you haven't placed it at all?
I've placed all of that weight on the fact that the 7.5 that you used last cycle, there's no evidence submitted by the city that justifies a reduction in cap rate. So I have not relied solely on that sale. I have information on other parkade sales, but not necessarily in Winnipeg and not necessarily downtown.
So you've derived your 8.5% from other parking structures not in Winnipeg?
No, I derived it from, it's not of the quality of Portage Place. Portage Place is a beautiful 1,000 square foot parking structure you could get off the ground. It's superior, in my opinion, to 299, because 299 has structural problems still. It is certainly inferior to both of those two, and therefore should have a higher cap rate, it's got more risk. And I believe that there was identifiable deferred maintenance when acquired.
I'm just trying to make sure that I'm very clearly understanding where
No,
your
I did
8.5
not.
came from.
I looked at other parking lots. We shouldn't compare assessment, but we can certainly compare quality. And I'm suggesting to you that of the downtown parking lots, that both 393 Portage, which is Portage Place, and 299 Fort are superior to the subject, and that's reflected in the cap rate.
Okay, so,
They would have more risk buying the Dreamin' Parkade than Portage Place Parkade.
sorry, my apologies, Mr. Chairman, I'm just having a hard time following, just so I want to make sure I'm hearing everything correctly. A moment ago, you said the subject was inferior to Portage Place, but superior to 299 Fort. But just now.
No,
I don't think
Come
he
on,
said
that's
No,
not
he
being reasonable.
did, and then he said after that 299 Ford and 393 Portage were both superior. I'm just trying to keep track of
Yeah.
each
Well,
statement.
make notes then, because.
I was,
maybe
and that's
you-
why I've asked the question.
In my opinion, they're superior.
Okay,
And it has to be how do you reflect that? Well, it should be reflected in the market rents or the cap rates. And you have all the information in the world on the market rents, because you have the time to spend calculating what all these different nuances are. And parking is doing better since we have the jets back, because there's more activity downtown, and we hope it continues. And we hope we keep investing in parking.
those are my questions, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre,
I have no questions.
any questions? I guess my only question would be, you're considering age as part of the component, one of the components that goes into the cap rate?
Yes, age, condition, location. Mostly age because of the wear and tear that's required on this type of property.
Thank you. Is it fair to make the assumption that a lot of the question and answering
All the
that we've
same.
done there is
Yes.
going to be the same for
Yes, it is.
the other properties? Okay, so if we can keep the specifics on individual properties where they vary from that, if you could, please.
I can try my best, Mr. Chairman.
Let's move on.
And we have an acceptance of the assessor's recommendation on,
The assessor has a recommendation on the next property,
yeah.
which is question mark Main. Would you tell us what your recommendation is and what the basis for that is, please? Ms.
My-
Assessor, make sure you give us the roll number as
I
well.
will, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-4696. The roll number is 12097617200. The address is Main Street. I'm making the recommendation to reduce the 2020 assessed value from $1,486,000 to $1,224,000. This property was in appeal for the 2018 BA, and I went out and inspected the property and counted the stalls. And the owner had been reporting 70 stalls here, and we had previously been assessing, I believe it was, just let me check my notes, bear with me please, 85 stalls, and the owner had been reporting 70 consistently. So I went out and counted them and made the recommendation to reduce the stall count, and then in 2019, also made the recommendation to reduce the stall count, and it was my error that it was not carried forward for 2020, so I'm making that recommendation here today. My recommendation in 2018 was based on our model parameters for the subject property, which was, a value of $1,387,000 to $1,142,000, using 70 stalls at our model rate of $102 a stall and a 7.5% cap rate. And again, my recommendation can be found on page 5 of my brief, using our model parameters of 70 stalls at $102 a stall with a 7% cap rate. This is a heated parking structure. We've applied $102 a stall because of the quality of the parking structure. It's a very poor quality parking structure, which is why it has $102 a stall on it for a heated parking structure. And I would like to note, these are our model parameters for the $1,224,000 at 7%.
Thank you. Mr. Story, you don't have any questions regarding that? Okay, Mr. McIntyre?
No question.
Just for the panel's benefit, it's the CN sheds, so it's not really, it's atypical, to say the least.
Okay, that will bring us to 136 McDermott, when you're ready, Ms. Assessor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one moment, please. We're looking at 136 McDermott Avenue, file number 19-4192, roll number 13060700100. This is above ground parking structure with some underground heated stalls. We have underground heated indoor parking of 68 stalls and outdoor parking of 202. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $5,193,000. This is a parking structure that was built in 2012 and is located next to the Grain Exchange office building. It's located between Lombard Avenue and McDermott Avenue and between Rory Street and Waterfront Drive. It's across from the Richardson Center parking structure. You can see the location as I previously just described on page 2. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. The top photo is the view on Lombard. The middle photo is the view of the entrance on McDermott. And the bottom picture is a view from Lombard. On page 4, you'll see income and expense request for the subject property. On page 5, you'll see our income valuation summary using our model parameters with 68 heated stalls at our model parameter of $138 a stall, and our unheated parameter for the 202 stalls at $103.50 a stall, for an overall blended rate of $112.19 a stall. With a 7% cap rate, we have $5,195,000. On the bottom of my page 5 are my comparables. The subject property is listed as number 5. They are reporting that they have a 40% expense ratio. They charge between $225 a stall to $285 a stall, and that they're making $150.06 a stall versus our blended rate of $112.19 a stall. On page 6, you'll see the gross rates that we have applied, that we've seen reported by parking management companies on parking structures. On page 7, you'll see the income valuation summary. On page 8, you'll see our cap rate information. On page 9, you'll see Municipal Assessment Act information. And on pages 11 through 16 is the income and expense mailer that was submitted by the owner. On page 17, you'll see the details as of April 1st, 2018. This property is managed by Indigo. They have daily, evening, casual, monthly rates. And then on page 18 through 22, 23, you will see our agenda that we have. Again, we have a 7% cap rate for all of our parking structures. We've applied that model parameter to this particular parking structure, and we've applied our modeled parameters for the parking rates. Again, our rate is much, much lower than what they're actually making, because again, we are in mass appraisal and we are looking at all properties and what would be considered as market. It's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions? from
No, I'm
you?
fine, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
Just one, this is a relatively new building.
Yep.
And there's no differentiation in cap rate between one that's built in 2012 and one that's built in 1963?
Again, because we have more information on the net operating incomes, we try to reflect those sorts of differences on the net operating incomes that are applied. The one that Mr. Story just accepted, again, on Main Street, it is a parking structure where they have plywood on the floor, there is mud there, it's under the CN rail line, it was built in like 19,
I actually,
10.
I have been in there.
and it's not the greatest parking structure, so because we have information on what people can attain at these places, because the age and all the repair and maintenance that's involved, you see places like the Bay Parkade where they're not making as much money as what our typical model would be, so we've applied the $90 versus the $103.50. For typical properties like on Main Street, for heated parking structures that are slightly outside the downtown, we apply $120 a stall. So we try to reflect those differences in age, those intangibles that you don't have comparables to defend with respect to cap rate. We reflect that in the net operating income versus the cap rate. Because we have the information on net operating incomes, we don't have the information on cap rates to start deciding, well, the arguments would be, playing devil's advocate, well, how can you say that? How do you defend your benchmark of where is a new parking structure? How do you know what your boundary is for what's new and what's old and your changes on the cap rate when you have no sales?
Okay,
So
well,
we're
that's
already
fine.
being
Maybe we've
asked
heard it.
where we got our stuff for the cap rate, so we're in mass appraisal, we apply the same thing across the board. And we try to reflect those intangibles in the net operating incomes, which is why we don't develop a gross and then apply an expense ratio for our parking model. We work directly from the net, because there are a lot of intangibles with parking. You could be a gravel parking lot and a paved one, and the gravel one is charging more. There's so many things involved that we don't get reported to us, and doing mass appraisal, you have to try to be cognizant of those things. You can't take these specific things. When you have a plethora of information, you can really develop a good, solid model that says, okay, this is what this would be, this is what this would be. But when you don't have that, you have to work with the information that you have. And we're an assessment jurisdiction that has to do mass appraisal for these properties. And that's the information that we get, and we try to work within those parameters that we're legislated by.
Okay, that's fine, that's all my questions.
Thank you. Just one quick clarification, and you may have mentioned this on page 5, your rent comparables. There's several items on here where there's an asterisk. What's the asterisk? What's the significance of that?
For stall count, the asterisk would be, so I have said that this is reported information from the owners. We can't develop a net per stall rate if an owner doesn't write the stall count. So that means the asterisk is, we've used our stall count.
Okay.
And usually those stall counts are either our stall count, or we've used the stall count that Impark has reported, because Impark always says the number of stalls. A lot of the times I have personally gone out and counted these stalls in these parking lots or parking structures, or someone in our department has. We did a 2008 parking study where people went out and counted all of the parking structures and counted all of the parking lots. So I have a number of things that I can look to and compare to. So if I've put an asterisk next to the stall count, that means I've used something that an owner hasn't reported.
Okay.
A lot of the time, the same thing with the rates. Those have been taken from the
Website or something.
so on
like that.
136 McDermott, if you look at the mailer that was submitted, there's a front page there that nothing was written on. On page 10, we have a spot for outdoor parking stalls. They haven't written it down. They have in the past, actually, just this cycle they didn't. Those monthly, daily, hourly rates. And all they've done this time is give us their expense statement for their income and expenses, which gives us a lot of information. This is a very good, in my opinion, mailer that's submitted for parking information. There's a lot of information here that shows stuff. It's not something like the previous property where it was insurance and property taxes. they've given us some solid information here. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of typical parking expenses for parking structures that are in this mailer. So that's why the asterisk is there, cause it's clearly taken from those indigo details that I showed on page 17. And again, when we look up this information on the websites, the last week of March, while I'm doing VA appeals, I'm looking up all this information right before April 1st to make sure it is close to the reference date as possible. So this information wasn't taken from the website today or prepping for this appeal. This information is actually gathered by myself in preparation of our 2020 assessment appeal prior to April 1st, 2018.
Thank you. Mr. Story, hear from you, please. Is it safe to assume this is just a cap rate issue?
Yeah, I'll just ask to carry forward the argument on cap rate for the next two, and then be done with that. And I'll just get you to turn to page 3, and again, this is a 136, it's got a McDermott address, but it comes off of Lombard. And if it's, you can see photographs in the assessor's brief. There was a heritage building on the site. The owners were convinced that to be able to keep this building leased, the grain exchange building leased, they needed parking. This parking with a short walk connection to the underground walkway system for the skywalks. It's an attractive property. It had to be built to look like a heritage building. That's why it's designed this way, because they tore down the annex to be able to build it. My only argument again is that there's no justification for the 7.5 to 7. And I believe that there aren't that many. If the city of Winnipeg can go out and rank industrial, there's storage warehouses, there's distribution, there's flex, they do offices, why can't they do arcades? Why can't they recognize the location, the age, condition? It's not, I don't think it's that difficult. I think I heard Ms. Warren say earlier today that there's only 22 parking structures. It's not that difficult to do. I think they could be better job done on cap rate and the justification for it. So my only argument and complaint is the 7.5. I'm asking for 8 here. 7.5 is really what our concern is. The 7, there's no justification for the increase from 7. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Ms. Warren?
I'm a little bit confused by the 7.5 comment. Are you asking for 7.5 or are you asking for 8%?
No, we're asking for 7.5.
So
I said my main argument today with respect to cap rate is there's no justification for the increase from 7.5, decrease from 7.5 to 7.
So you're asking for 7.5?
I'm asking for 7.5, yes.
Okay, your brief says 8.
Yes,
Okay, so
I'm
you've
asking-
revised it?
I'm telling the board that the basis for my being here on these properties is I'm objecting to the reduction in cap rate without any evidence to support it.
So are you saying you're revising your requested value from 4?
No, I'm not. I'm leaving that to the board to make that decision.
Okay.
Thank you.
So are you contesting that a brand new parking structure built in 2012 should be an 8% cap rate? Because you talked about ranking. So to get to the
Well,
point of ranking.
it still has the same challenges. It's a parking structure. You
So-
drive cars in there, they drop, you've heard all this 5,000 times. They've got inherent risks. They're unique. They're difficult properties. Yes, I believe 8% is an appropriate cap rate even for a new one. But these two properties, you've got this anomaly. You got one.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Okay.
we're getting a little bit off. I'm trying to keep
Okay.
things.
Go ahead.
So what was your question?
My question was, Mr. Story had talked about ranking. The city needs to do a better job and we need to rank properties based on their age. So I'm trying to develop and understand his ranking system. So he is ranking a brand new parking structure at 8%. So you're saying older ones need to be higher
One would assume they would be.
and a new one is at 8%. Is that my
And newer ones
understanding?
might be lower.
Okay.
But that's not happening
Okay.
because newer ones are being built And there might even be an oversupply issue in some areas.
So when you're ranking, you're looking at sort of site-specific age information on the subject property, correct? With respect to coming up with your cap rate?
You know, when we look at cap rates on industrials, we look at age, condition, location, that is building ratio, access and egress, seating height, loading docks. There's lots of criteria to develop to be able to rank these properties and have appropriate. It's inappropriate that 170, which is on one side of the Grain Exchange building, same owner, they bought that because they had tried to get parking for the Grain Exchange and the Hamilton Bank building. And on the other side, 136, they're both close together. One is 7 years old and the other is 56 years old. And the city uses the same cap rate, and that's illogical.
And so my,
And the city comes to this board with no evidence and says, we think we should reduce cap rate, and I believe that's incorrect.
and I'm trying to understand your position, Mr. Story, so please bear with me in trying to understand that position. So your position is looking at site-specific age information, because these are all downtown parking structures, so when you're talking about industrial buildings of location, downtown parking structures are all downtown, same location.
Yes.
So when you're looking at the difference in your cap rate, a large portion of ranking in your mind has to do with age, is that correct?
Because with age comes condition, there are different
I think
ways to
I'm
build things
think I'm
today. You don't build post-tension anymore because you know it's gonna deteriorate faster.
Condition and age go hand in hand. An older parking structure that's older is in a worse condition than a newer one. So I'm sort of oversimplifying it by saying age, but what I'm saying is you're ranking these on a site-specific way based on their age, correct?
Not just age.
Okay.
No.
I think my next question
Condition
then-
is more, condition and age, but age gives you condition in parking structures. You're putting heat with water, with salt, with steel, with concrete, and they're very expensive, and you
Okay.
can't ignore that.
My next question, Mr. Story.
Yes, yes.
Since we're looking at this property and we're saying this is a newer property, it should be at 8%, possibly lower, but using 8%, would you not think it's more appropriate to take what they're actually making, which is $150 a stall at 270 stalls, and capping that at 8% comes out at $6,077,000. Is that not significantly higher than the assessed value of 5.1?
If that would be higher, yes. What you just said would be higher than 5.1, that's correct.
So you're choosing to accept our model on rates, but you're trying to use site-specific information with respect to cap rate. Is it not one or the other? Either we look at it site-specific, this is what they're making, this is the
You
age,
can
the
rank-
cap rate
you
should be
can
this?
rank no two buildings are the same, you know that.
Okay.
And we're going through this, I don't know why we're going through this. You have people that buy real estate, they buy it for a reason. They don't go out and buy parkades because they want to own parking structures. They do it to enhance the value of the buildings that they own around them. So to go through this whole exercise is illogical, and to be sitting here in front of this board and yourself, and my job is to try to explain to this board that they have four parking lots. Two of them are 56 years old. One of them's 41 years old. And
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that this is an answer to
It's
any
not
of
going
the
anywhere.
questions that I've asked.
my position is that I don't believe that you have adequate evidence to support a reduction in cap rate. That's my opinion.
My last question, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Story, where in your brief is the evidence to show that our information is wrong?
And we don't, the onus is on you, Ms. Warren, not me. You're the property owner, you're the assessor. And we would assume you'd bring good enough evidence to the board.
Mr.
That's
Chairman, I
convincing.
think that the city's position and the evidence that we've brought forward is good evidence, and I do take a little bit of offense to the commentary that the
And I don't-
evidence that we have
Okay,
submitted is
okay.
not good.
Can we just move on then, please?
Yes, that was my last question, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
No questions.
Yeah, and I have no questions, thank you. I see the next property is 299 Fort, and I know we've heard a lot about this property already, so rather than rehashing what we've heard,
Keep
if
that
you
in
just
mind, yeah.
want to just refer to it. Whenever you're ready then, please. Mrs.
Yes,
Sussman.
just give me a moment, Mr. Chairman. We're looking at 299 Fort, file number 19-4175, roll number 12097721800. The address is 299 Fort Street. This is a parking structure built in 1978, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $25,031,000. This parking structure, if you turn to page 2, you'll see an aerial photo of it. It's located under Winnipeg Square, located between Main Street and Fort Street, and between Portage and Crayon. On page 3, you'll see subject property photos. On page 4, you'll see sale and income expense information. On page 5, you'll see 936 indoor heated parking stalls at our monthly net unit rent of $156 a stall. As I stated previously in one of my presentations, that 201 Portage at the 35 Albert Street Parkade and 299 Fort under Winnipeg Square charge the highest rates. And they show that they're, up until this cycle, showed that they were making some of the highest rates for parking structures. And they're considered the best of quality of parking structures, so they receive the highest range in our model for heated parking structures, which tops out at $156 a stall. Capped at 7% is $25,031,000. If you look at the heated parking structures that are shown here, 35 Albert, only 300 of those 828 stalls are heated, and they're making $156 a stall. 299 Fort, they are all heated and they're making $170.11 a stall, and we are assessing them at $156 a stall. Some other, again, those are the two probably most comparable to each other, but again, 35 Albert, 500 of those parking stalls are unheated parking stalls. If you turn to page 10 of my brief, you'll see the mailer that was submitted by the property owner. Page 15 shows the income and expense information. Page 18 shows the Indigo details. This is operated by Indigo. Indigo didn't actually put any monthly rates on this parking structure. They don't advertise it on their website. I included on page 19 the actual rates from Indigo for this parking structure when they did advertise their rates as of April 1st, 2016 for $290 and monthly reserve for $345 a stall. On page 20, the sales mailer for the subject property, showing it sold at an 8.5% cap rate. It indicates that an appraisal was not used to determine the sales price. We asked if it was an arm's length open market transaction. That was yes. We asked if there was a single lease. They said no. Needless to say, I've included the mailer. That's because that was what was reported. That was the income statement that was reported. And on page 20 through 28 of my brief is our addenda. I've tried to keep it short, Mr. Chairman, as per your request with respect to the information presented. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I thank you. Mr. Story, questions?
Yes, just page 21, you mentioned 8.5 and 8% was the cap rate.
I didn't think I said 8.5, but
I think you did. If you didn't, that's fine, it's 8%. So no more question.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
And I have no questions. Mr. Story, once again, is this
Yes,
cap rate?
I don't believe that there's justification for a reduction in cap rate from 7.5 to 7%. I think 7.5 should be the appropriate cap rate on this property. particularly in light of the physical condition, we've talked about it. It's still in the process of when it was acquired in 2010, there was a repair program put in, $6 million over 10 years, which is $600,000 a year, and they're doing that, they've continued to do that. So based on this current condition, even with maintenance, they've not dealt with the lower level yet at all, but age, I think that there's no justification in the department reducing the cap rate on this particular property. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Warren?
Mr. Story, you're using 8% on this property?
Pardon me?
You're using 8% on
Yes.
this property?
Yes.
You've accepted our income and you've ignored what they're actually making, which is significantly higher than what
Well,
we
you don't know
applied.
exactly what they're actually making because a goodly number of these leases are tied in, of these parking revenues are tied into leases in the building.
We don't know what they're making, though that mailer hasn't been signed as to being true and accurate
Well,
as to what they're making. Are you
I
indicating
don't
that the
know that
owner
you have
is
all the
lying to us
information.
on their income and
No,
expense
they're not
mailer?
lying to you. Good God, this is ridiculous.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
You're suggesting people are lying to you on their questionnaires? It's parking lot.
Didn't make that
Right.
Okay,
suggestion.
let's just keep it to questions and answers, please. Your question was,
My question was, you've ignored the fact that they're making significantly more than our model. And your answer, I believe, Mr. Chairman, was, you don't know what they're actually making.
okay, so basically what you're saying is you're using market versus actual. Is that correct?
And I'm asking
And your
this-
question would be, if Mr. Story were to look at the actual, would it still be the same cap rate? Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, my question was that he's using a site-specific cap rate, yes. Is he ignoring the actual income? He's accepted ours, that's fine, but I'm asking if he's reviewed the actual income and noted that they are making more than what we are applying.
Okay. And I think your answer was no, you didn't
No,
consider it.
and the fact is that you have to analyze it further to find out if some leases are included in the tenant leases, parking is included in the tenant leases.
My next question, Mr. Story, this parking structure was built in 1978, correct?
I think it was built in 76, but 78.
Okay, so it's 41 years old, possibly slightly older. And you've applied an 8% cap rate to a 41-year-old parking structure and an 8% cap rate to a 7-year-old parking structure.
Mhm.
In the previous presentation that you gave, you had indicated to the city that it was incorrect for the city to apply the same cap rate to a 7-year-old parking structure versus the one that's across the street that is significantly older.
That's
So
quite
you yourself,
logical.
would you not, you said it was illogical, yes, you're correct. So you yourself have done the same thing where you're applying an 8% cap rate to a 41-year-old parking structure as well as a 7-year-old parking structure.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you,
And I
that's my
think
question,
8%
Mr. Chair.
might be a good place to start.
Mr. McIntyre?
No questions.
I have no further questions, thank you. That brings us to the final property on our docket today, which is 170 McDermott. We're ready, we're here from you, please, Mrs. Sussman.
Yes, just give me a moment, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we're looking at 170 McDermott Avenue. The file number is 19-4674, roll number 13-096-070-400. We're looking at a parking structure located on the southwest corner of McDermott Avenue and Rory Street. This is a parking structure that was built in 1963. We have 295 above ground unheated parking stalls. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $5,234,000. If you look at page 2, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property showing its location as previously described. On page 3, you'll see a subject property photos. On page 4, you'll see income and expense and sale history information. This parking structure sold in 2007 for $4,500,000. On page 5, you'll see our income valuation summary for 295 stalls with our monthly net unit rent of $103.50 a stall for a cap rate of 7% for a value of $5,234,000. This parking structure is number 8 on the comparables. They are reporting that they're making $175.37 a stall. We are applying $103.50. You'll see legislation and income capitalization information. On page 10, you'll see the income and expense mailer that was submitted by the owner. On page 16, you'll see the income statement. On page 17, you'll see the parkade information again. As of the reference date, Indigo was not advertising their monthly rates, so I included what the monthly rates were advertised on April 1st, 2016, and they were charging $200, $235, and $225. The owner actually previously reported monthly rates on their income and expense mailer. They wrote it on the front page, and those rates from 2016 were verified by the mailer. The owner just chose not to report them this cycle, and they also were not reported on the Indigo website. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Story,
No, I'm fine, thank you.
questions asked and answered on previous? Thank you.
Same arguments earlier.
I'm fine.
So will you take this just for yours then, please, Mr. Story?
Yes. This is an older parking lot. It was bought in conjunction with doing an application or responding to an RFP on the Hamilton Bank building a number of years ago. But it also services the grain exchange, same owners. It's an older structure. I believe it's, I believe it's post-tension construction. It's an older type of construction. We're suggesting that there's no justification for a reduction in cap rate from 7.5 last year to 7 this year by the assessor. And based on age and condition, we would suggest an 8% might be more appropriate. And that would be $4,579,875. That's fine.
Thank you. Mrs. Assessor?
So the value, Mr. Story, you're asking for is $79,875 more than what the owner paid to acquire the property in 2007.
I don't know if you calculated it, I'll accept your calculation.
Okay.
They bought it for a reason, I just explained the reason. They were responding to a tender for the city of Winnipeg for long-term accommodation.
That wasn't my question, Mr. Story. My
Well, you're
question
asking about
was,
the purchase price and why they paid what they paid.
I didn't ask why they paid what they paid. I
Okay.
said you're requesting a value that's $79,875 more than the sale price in 2007. That was my question.
Okay.
If you take the actual income, Mr. Story, and apply your 8% cap rate, would you agree that the value is $7,760,000?
I can't confirm that without doing the calculation, but I can confirm if you take the actual net income of $548,848 at 7.5% being the $7 million range. So it sounds like the number you just quoted is correct.
And again, you stated previously, it is illogical to use the same cap rate on a new 7-year-old parking structure as
Okay,
you
so
would.
this is an asked and answered question. is it
Okay.
not?
So you're still using 8% regardless of the age?
You don't stop, dude. Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Story.
Age, condition, location, connection to the skywalks, quality of construction, nature of construction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's realistic.
Is your questions?
Those are my questions.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Well, I wanted to know a little bit more about the sale, but it's a significantly dated sale. You said
Yes.
there was motivation involved.
Yes, so they're motivated for two reasons. One is they wanted to have parking for tenants to really accommodations Canada to be in the grain exchange building. And secondly, they wanted to respond to proposal by the city of Winnipeg to lease the Hamilton Bank building. They were talking about linking it at the second level, actually, making it one, and that was part of their proposal. And that part wasn't accepted, but they bought the parkade because they needed it for the grain exchange anyway.
Okay, thank you. A desire for a short summation on all the properties, or,
I think I want to give a short summation if that's possible.
yeah, well, I don't know, is it possible?
I would like to, if you'd permit me, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Please be brief.
I
I think
will
we know
be-
your position, so
I will
If
be
you can
very brief.
sum it up for us, please.
I think the city has come in here today and provided market evidence with respect to our parking rates, with respect to cap rates, albeit not for parking structures. I believe we've come in with a sound argument with respect to the information that we've provided. I believe that we've met our onus of defending the value of these properties. And I just wanted to make that summation just because there was a lot of commentary with respect to the information that we do provide here to the board. And I would like to say that I think the city has done a good part in defending the values here today and have done a thorough job in researching what's happening with parking structures, contrary to some of the arguments that may have been made.
Thank you. Mr. Story?
I
you have
think
an
you heard
opportunity.
my story, there's no justification, the onus is on the assessor, it's not on the owner to come in. It's not, and the assessor has not provided evidence, I think, of good enough quality to justify a change in the cap rate from the previous cycle. There aren't sales, we acknowledge that, but there are other ways to monitor and to come to an appropriate cap rate. And I don't think that has been done today. And the other thing, I apologize to the board, I get very frustrated on these parking structures because I believe that the city can do a better job on, we shouldn't be fighting every time we come here about parking and surface parking and what it's worth. Again, in other jurisdictions, coincidentally, my office is doing one in Calgary today, and they have a capital replacement reserve, and that reduces the cap rate, so they don't have this range in cap rates. And they're looking at host properties, which we used to do, because years ago, the building on 170 McDermott was used, the same cap rate as the grain exchange building was used on it. And they're the host building, they do that in Calgary now. They try to identify a host building that's connected, adjacent to. If it's not, they look at the properties around it. They don't have any problem with coming in, and then nobody's screaming about parking lots having ranges of cap rates, because they've allowed a deduction for the value in the capital replacement reserve. And if you have a capital replacement reserve, there's less risk, and that means a lower cap rate. So it can be dealt with. It shouldn't have to be in this fashion. So I apologize for getting angry, getting frustrated, but I deal with this stuff every day, and I'm dealing with the owners. And I can't answer the owners when he says, I have a building built in, that's 7 years old, and I have another one across the street who almost did exact same volume, which is 170 McDermott and 136 McDermott. How do you explain to the owner that the cap rates are all over the place and you're not recognizing the age of the building relative to another building? So with that, I'll again apologize and thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
And I suggest that we go back to our 7.5 cap. Thank you.
Thank you both for your presentations today,
Thank you for your time.
and the orders will be out in due course. Thank you, and I'll call the hearing to a close.